emulators were used in the production of this podcast.
Where did you learn to podcast? That good?
That's awesome, sweetie. Thank you. Welcome to the Atari Jaguar Game by Game podcast, the show where we take a good long look at Atari's last home video game console and its library, one game at a time. Whether you've been a Jaguar fan all along, are new to this whole Atari Jaguar thing, or really don't like the Jaguar at all, I'm glad you're here. Good to see you. Not that I'm watching you through your phone camera or anything right at this very moment. No, that'd be creepy. I'm the host of the show, I go by the name Shinto, and in this episode, I feel the need for a high relative velocity over the surface of the Earth in part number J9052, Super Burnout. Super Burnout is a 2MB cartridge, a motorcycle racing game for 1 or 2 competitive players, developed by Shen Technologies and published by Atari with a release date around the beginning of July 1995. It carries an ESRB rating of K to A, kids to adults. Shen Technologies was a French developer founded in 1995 by Qiang Tan, Olivier Nallet, Alexandre Etienne, and Olivier Nallet. And yes, I did mean to say that they were founded in 1995, even though the game came out in 95. How does that work exactly? We'll get there. It's an interesting story. And I'll start that story a few years prior in the European Atari ST demo scene circa 1988. Tan and Ade met at school. They were a year or two apart, I believe. Ade was doing a lot of assembly language programming on the ST, and Tan was into graphics. They were impressed by the work from other European Atari ST demo crews like The Exceptions out of Germany and the Care Bears from Sweden, and they decided that there needed to be a French group that could put together demos of comparable quality, and this demo crew was to be called the Constellations. The crew was soon joined by additional coders, Stéphane Bensoussan and Laurent Anquetou, then William Elzazine. They didn't have a musician before Etienne came on board, so before that, they just looped samples pulled from CDs. Olivier Nallet joined, adding some mad coder skills. Members who used handles, of course, not their real names, so in the Constellations team we would have found Centaurus, Pegasus, Phoenix, and Scorpio. Get it? Constellations? After a couple demos, they attracted the attention of Atari, the French arm of Atari, interested in having them put together a promotional demo for the Atari STE. I found what is rumored to be this Atari commissioned demo, but there's some ambiguity here because the scrolling text doesn't mention the Constellations at all. Still, I'll link to that as well as all of their confirmed demos over at demozoo.org and puet.net. They also did some graphics which were used in one or more Atari ads. Several members dropped out as they went in different directions, different schools. Ade went from being a contributor to editor-in-chief of ST Magazine, and, well, Tan kind of missed the fun that they had as the Constellations, and one afternoon decided they needed to join forces to make a video game, or at least start one, and shop around for a publisher. The 1992 Summer Olympics in Barcelona were coming up, so maybe they could do a game that would tie into that. Tan worked on the graphics for it, but I don't think much more than that came out of the project. These guys were also fans of Sega's superscalar arcade games, titles like Hang On and Outrun and Afterburner. These games used fast scaling of two-dimensional sprites calculated internally in 3 dimensions. Fluid movement and a great sense of speed is what you got with these superscalar games. Mr. Ade had contacts at another French video game developer called Virtual Experience, who was a registered third-party Jaguar developer. Thierry Chambry, I think was the guy's name, but more importantly, Virtual Experience had a pair of Atari Jaguar development kits. They were working on 2 games for the Jaguar at the time, a space-based top-down shooter called Zorix 2, and a cartoony platformer called Indiana Jags. Zorix 2 was the follow-up to an unreleased Zorix 1, which they were working on until they saw Raiden 2 and presumably decided to step things up. Zorix 2 on the Jaguar was said to run at a smooth 60 frames per second with up to 70 sprites on the screen at one time, and with a simultaneous 2-player cooperative mode. Indiana Jags was said to have big sprites, lots of animation, and a high frame rate as well. Virtual Experience wasn't working on these games on the weekends, so they let Ade and friends borrow one of the Jaguar development systems. They'd pick it up Friday afternoon, code like crazy, and then return it Monday morning. Reminds me a lot of id Software's early days, except these guys had permission to borrow the hardware. Check out the Wolfenstein 3D episode for more on id Software's origin story. How it worked here in France, from what I gather, is that each team member would work independently on their own computers in their own bedrooms. Tan used an Amiga 2000 running Deluxe Paint for the graphics. Etienne used an Atari STE for the music. Ade used an Atari TT for the code. I think it was Ade who used the TT. And Nallet would write code and put everything together using the borrowed dev kit, usually in Ade's house, which effectively served as their main office. With the money they got from Super Burnout, skipping ahead a bit here, Shen Technologies was formed, and this new company started work on a second Jaguar game, a shooter, originally called Stellar X, but later renamed Nexus. They wanted to use computer-generated imagery via 3D Studio for the sprites and backgrounds, basically making the game photorealistic. It was coming along well. The levels were done, the bosses were done, the music was in. It was about 70% complete when Atari decided to shift to 3D games to compete with the Saturn and PlayStation, and pretty much killed off the 2D projects, including Nexus. Some members of Shen Technologies left to join other companies like Ubisoft. Others stayed and worked on games like Adidas Power Soccer 2 and later Power Soccer 98 for Psygnosis. They had started internal development on other games as well, but weren't able to find publishers soon enough to get money rolling in to cover development costs associated with a team of now 15 people. Shen ended up shutting its doors in 1998. Let's check out some more of the title theme music, and then we'll move into the actual development history of Super Burnout. Shen Technologies' first game, which of course started in the tail end of 1993 before Shen was official, was a motorcycle racing game inspired by Sega's Super Hang-On. They figured a good racing game was a notable hole in the Jaguar's library and set out to create one, originally under the name Burnout. Their demo scene roots were a definite inspiration here. Making demos on the Atari ST, absolutely fluid scrolling was essential, so they wanted a game that was likewise smooth and fast. Frame rate was everything. A frame per second saved is a frame per second earned, as the old saying goes. Actual development was not smooth and fast. It was slow going at first, being limited to those crazy weekend hours, but this fledgling game of theirs, after 6 months of sleepless nights, was coming along so well that it was actually ahead of Virtual Experience's own titles in terms of development, even though Burnout started later. Atari got involved, and Burnout became an official Jaguar project. This would have been somewhere around June of 1994, and with Atari's involvement came a Jaguar development kit that Shen could call their own. Not being limited to weekends anymore, progress on the game picked up. They were pretty much left alone during this middle phase of development, which lasted 2 to 4 months. Atari's Ludovic Duval kept an eye on them, but Atari itself was pretty hands-off. It sounds like maybe they weren't making milestone payments on Burnout, so without any cash money in the game, they didn't need to tinker. According to Kiang Tan, getting the opponent AI just right was pretty tricky. They wanted the computer to have a human-like fallibility, be able to make mistakes as opposed to opponents that would always run perfect laps. I'll let you know later if they were able to pull this off. There's a ROM image floating around, a non-interactive, silent, looping demo for Burnout that was first posted by Clint Thompson on Atari Age in 2018. It's labeled a CES demo, and if that's accurate, it would have been the 1994 Summer Consumer Electronics Show in Chicago, but I don't have any first-hand accounts of the demo appearing there. The ROM image, as I said, is non-interactive and runs as a loop. You see the game engine starting from a stop and then quickly building up speed, driving along an undulating track with trees and signs on the sides, hills and a partly cloudy sky off in the distance in separate parallax layers. There aren't any motorcycles visible, and while the track is flying by, the camera view kind of wanders back and forth. When it reaches the red and white barrier on one side of the road, it'll bounce off and slide over to the other side. Kind of like some driver assistance in cars these days. Lane keeping assist, where if you let go of the steering wheel, it'll kind of drift back and forth in the lane. Not that I've tried this personally, of course. At least not outside of a controlled experiment on a lonely stretch of road. Anyway, there are a few other things that pop up on the screen, and these repeat in a 49-second loop. First, the name of the game slides in like a set of jaws snapping shut, burn on the top, out on the bottom, written in a scripty font, black letters on a plain white background. This disappears, and then several seconds of track footage later, there's a list of bullet points that appear on the screen in black text. Burnout's main features, it says, are full screen animation, high frame rate, 60 per second, multiplayer possibilities, modem, ... Banshee audio sound system, musics with CD quality sound, realistic audio effects plus speeches, much, much more. With Burnout, it closes, we intend to deliver the apex in 3D bitmap race ever seen on any entertainment system, so watch out for it. This text with a bullet point stays on the screen for a full 4 seconds before it disappears, and about 10 seconds later, the black-on-white full-screen Burnout name quickly flashes 3 times as kind of a built-in epilepsy trigger test, I guess. There's one other text overlay in the game, and that's the name of the development team, which is not Shen, not yet, but instead the Externals. Very demo crew-sounding name. Code and concept by the Externals, it says, and also hardware support from Virtual Experience. About their bullet points, I couldn't find anything contemporary called the Banshee audio sound system, but I would like to touch on the multiplayer possibilities. Olivier Nallet spent some time working on support for the JagLink networking peripheral, 1 player per Jaguar, but they had some trouble with the game crashing while networking was enabled. Kinda sounds like Doom. But unlike Doom, the networking support was eventually dropped from Super Burnout. Atari released a Jaguar promotional VHS videotape toward the end of 1994, which is sent out to retailers and also available to anybody who wanted to buy it for $8.95 plus $4.95 shipping and handling. I don't think I've mentioned this tape before on the podcast, but Burnout is among the 31 included on this tape toward the end. I've already covered 23 of these games on the podcast, and that leaves 7 more that'll be coming up in future episodes. Hopefully I'll remember to mention the tape coverage then, too. I actually had a hard time tracking down a copy of this video online. I didn't see it on YouTube, and while Atari Mania has it, it seems to be corrupted after the 18-minute mark. Fortunately, Hugh Johnson of the Retro Game Club podcast has it on his website, broken out into 5 parts. I'll include a link to his site in the show notes. I know I mentioned this in a prior episode. Bishop? In which episode did I mention Hugh's Jaguar page?
iWar, episode 26.
Okay, iWar. Well, I'll link to it again, and the Retro Game Club podcast as well. Check it out.
Edit.
After I recorded this segment, I heard on the Retro Game Club podcast that Hugh sent his copy of the Jaguar promo tape from the store where he worked at the time to somebody else for a high-quality digital transfer. And this is now available on YouTube, so I'll include a link to that video in the show notes.
End of edit.
So in this video, we see a title screen showing the name of the game as Burnout and 4 short gameplay sequences. Even though the game is in the work-in-progress part of the video, it looks pretty far along. It's fast and smooth with sound effects and music and many of the final sprites in place. Levels look different. The American track, for example, has different skies and backgrounds. It looks like it has the Canadian ones instead. And the status displays at the top of the screen are a little different. The tachometer is in the center rather than on the right. The position number is smaller, and there are no labels for these things, like lap number or speed or position. Another difference in this early version seems to have 8 motorcycles on the track at one time. In the final game, it maxes out at 7. There's a rather cynical review of this tape posted on Usenet, rec.games.video.atari, by a user with the initials BH. Of Burnout, he says that it's the best racing game on the tape, the others are Club Drive and Checkered Flag, but only looks slightly better than Road Rash on the Genesis, and he says that Road Rash on the 3DO has nothing to worry about. On a scale of 1 to 10, he rates it a 5. Primary development on Burnout wrapped up around December of 1994, but there were some additional tweaks that went in during the 4 or so months before the final build was approved. They added more motorcycle options, more cheat codes, played around with the JagLink support that I mentioned before, things like that. Some of these changes Atari asked for, and some of Atari's requests didn't get implemented. For example, they wanted to have leaves fall from the trees and move around as the motorcycles zip by. That didn't make it in. Burnout was shown off at the Winter Consumer Electronics Show in January of 1995. I have a couple accounts of the game as it appeared at the show. First comes from Joe Catadula of Tronix Multimedia, who called Burnout an ultra-smooth, high-speed motorcycle racing game for 1 or 2 players in split screen. Another account is from GamePro, who published a rundown of the Winter CES in their March 1995 issue. For Burnout, GamePro says that only 1 level was shown, that's the American track, but, and this is a quote, the fast-paced 16-meg 2-player action has a Road Rash look and feel. They also said that Atari planned to add modem support. There's a prototype ROM out there of Burnout which shows the game pretty close to completion, and this might be what was shown at this CES, or if not, it isn't too far off. Kgramr says that this is the E3 version, and that's possible, but it wouldn't have been state-of-the-art at the time, and that's in part because 3 months prior to E3, in February, there was a name change. No longer was it Burnout, but Super Burnout, because if it's Super, it'll sell better. I got to thinking about this, and what I did was I grabbed a list of notable failed products off the internet and stuck Super in front of the product names to see if maybe this would have helped them sound better and therefore sell better. Here we go. Microsoft's music player, the Zune, could have been called the Super Zune. Yeah, that one, I guess, kind of sounds more like a camera. How about Super New Coke? Or Super Betamax? Oh, here's my favorite, the Apple Super Newton. Now, I am not an Apple guy, not at all. I own one Apple product, an 11-year-old MacBook, and that one I got for free and used for testing websites that I was developing in Safari. I bring it out every once in a while if I need to see how some code or another works under macOS, but that's it. That said, I would totally buy something called the Apple Super Newton. I can just imagine the mascot character, a 17th century looking guy with wavy long hair wearing a mask and cape. Sounds awesome. So yeah, I'm going to have to side with Atari on this one. Super is better. Whether or not this specific prototype version of the game was shown at E3, it's got several differences compared to the final game. First, of course, is the title screen showing Burnout instead of Super Burnout, and that extends to the menu screens too. The A button is used to navigate menus rather than B, which is what it should be according to the Jaguar development standards. It'll make a sound if you push B, but not actually do anything. There's no manual transmission option, no ability to change up your controls, and no way to change the number of laps that make up a race. The aptitude of computer-controlled opponents only has 2 levels in this version, named Weak and Strong. In Versus mode, you can't choose your bikes, but you do have 3 game styles, Beginner, Arcade, and Ace Racer. I couldn't find any difference in behavior between these 3. There's also an option to control sensitivity, low or high, and I didn't really notice any difference between those either. The on-screen gauges and indicators look a lot like their final components, but the speed is not localized and shows kilometers per hour on both PAL and NTSC consoles. The game also tends to crash a lot with 2 players, and the star hash reset sequence, it hadn't been added yet. Development of the game finished around May 25th of 1995, That's 2 weeks after E3, and about a month before the completed version was shown off at the Fun and Games press event Atari hosted on June 20th. Officially, the game was released on or around July 5th of 1995. Get your motor running. You're in for the most challenging motorcycle racing experience ever. So says the intro to the game manual. It continues, whether you're racing in championship, competing against a friend, or just trying to beat the records, this race is so real you'll feel the G-force, hear bugs crashing against your helmet, and smell the burning octane. Feel the adrenaline pumping through your blood as the announcer signals the start of the race. As you zoom away from the start, the engine's roar will be echoed by your pounding heart. Hit the first curve at breakneck speeds and launch into the straights as you push your bike to the limit. As you finish each lap, your ears will ring with the crowd's thunderous cheers. Push your bike to the edge, scream past the competition, and pound home to the finish. Are we all sufficiently energized now? Good. Let's see what Super Burnout has to offer. First, there are 4 racing modes you can choose from: Trainer, Versus, Record, and Championship, not necessarily in that order. Trainer mode is the default. This is one where you choose where you want to race, and the computer puts up 6 other motorcycles to race against you. Versus mode is the 2-player option, played in a split screen, player 1 up top, player 2 on the bottom. There are no computer-controlled opponents here, just a one-on-one fight to the death. Or finish line, whichever comes first. And it should be the finish line unless you leave the game paused for like a really long time. The third mode is record mode, where it's just you all alone trying to set a new track record. The cartridge is helpful in that for every track it stores the best single lap time and the best per lap average throughout the race with initials for each, so you have something to shoot for. And finally, Championship mode takes you on a tour of all 8 tracks in alphabetical order, where your finishing position on one race is your starting position on the next. You also get points for how well you do. In 7th place, you get 9 points. 6th place is worth 10 points. 5th is worth 11. 4th is 13. 3rd is 15 points. 2nd place is 17 points. And 1st place gets you 20 points. That's actually the exact same point breakdown used in Supercross 3D. I thought there might be something to that, so I checked. And this is the scoring system that was used in FIM Grand Prix Motorcycle Racing World Championships between 1988 and 1991. You may have already known this, but it was news to me. Hey, what do I know about motorcycle racing?
Nothing.
Well, that's not fair. I have researched 2 different motorcycle racing games on the Jaguar.
Practically nothing.
Yeah, you know that's right. At the end of the championship circuit, all your points are tallied up, and you're given an overall grade and rating. The maximum score you can get is 160 points, and the minimum is 72. Certain points ranges give you a letter grade and a text rating, and while I don't have a complete breakdown of the points ranges, here are my best guesses. Between 72 and 100 points, you get a grade of F and a rating of keep on. It's encouraging you to do better, to keep on trying. From 101 to 115, you get a D for decent. From 116 to 130, it's a C for good. From 131 to 145, you get a B for awesome. And from 146 to 159, you get an A for excellent. And for a perfect 160, you still get the rating of A, but the text reads, wait for it, perfect. In addition to the 4 racing modes, you can further customize your game by adjusting the aptitude of the computer opponents and the number of laps. The computer-controlled racers, or drones as the game calls them, can be weak, average, or strong. Average is the default. And the number of laps can be as low as 2 or as high as 7, with 4 as the default. These settings apply to all 4 modes, Trainer, Versus, Championship, or Record, except for the drone strength, which makes no sense in Versus or Record modes. The game offers up 6 different motorcycles, each one looking about the same but differing in terms of tire grip, acceleration, maximum speed, and color, both for the rider and the bike itself, and each one has a snazzy name, too. Tire grip can be rated very low, low, medium, or high, and the acceleration is rated either low, medium, or high. The appearance is basically the same across the board. They're all built the same chassis, I guess, but let's go over the various models and see how they differ. The Lightning Racer is first and also the default. The bike itself is blue with the rider decked out in red and white. Very French, or American, or British, or Russian Federationian, or Australian, Chilean, Cuban, Czech, Icelandic, Liberian, Dutch, Norwegian, New Zealander, Samoan, or Thai. Maybe Luxembourg. Whatever national flag its colors mimic, if any, the Lightning Racer has low grip and low acceleration, and its maximum speed is 217 miles, or 347 kilometers per hour. Sliding Thunder is next, and it comes in any color you want as long as it's olive green, and the rider wears gold and white. Grip is very low, see why it's called Sliding Thunder, but its acceleration is medium. Its max speed is 227 miles or 364 kilometers per hour. Lightning and thunder, kind of a theme between those two, and the next two may have a bit of a theme as well. The Killing Turtle comes in a coppery color with the rider wearing cyan and white. The grip is high, but the acceleration is low. That's where the turtle part comes in. That and the maximum speed, which is only 148 miles per hour or 237 kilometers per hour. If you've got a turtle, you also got to have a rabbit, the old tortoise in the hare thing. I realize that a tortoise isn't necessarily the same thing as a turtle, and that the hare isn't the same thing as a rabbit, but this next bike is called the Super Rabbit. Super Rabbit sounds better than Super Hare, though, right? I wish I had super hair. Anyway, the Super Rabbit is a cyan color, and the Rabbit Rider is purple and white. Super Rabbit's grip is medium, and the acceleration is also medium. Top speed is a little better than the Murderous Turtle at 155 miles per hour, or 248 kilometers per hour. The last two bikes don't follow a theme. The Reflex Z is kind of hard to say, doesn't really roll off the tongue, but it comes in a snazzy gold color. The rider wears blue and white. Grip is medium, but acceleration is low. Its maximum speed is a Super Rabbit and Killing Turtle killing 169 miles per hour, or 4.51 kilometers per minute. Had to mix up my units there just to throw you off. Finally, we have, wait for it, Wheels of Terror! Yeah, these scary wheels come attached to a purple bike, while the rider, hopefully always attached to the bike, wears yellow and white. Grip is low, but acceleration is high, and the maximum speed is 200 miles per hour, or 320 kilometers per hour. High speed, quick acceleration, but low grip. The name makes sense now, doesn't it? In championship mode, the motorcycle you pick at the beginning is the one that you use throughout all 8 tracks. If you're in record, or versus, or trainer modes, you might want to look at the track to determine which motorcycle is best suited. That implies you personally own all 6, or at least rent them, so you've got some money. Good for you. Since you have the option in these modes, you may, for example, want to ride the Killing Turtle on technical tracks with a lot of bends and turns, and the Sliding Thunder on a high-speed track with long straightaways. The choice is yours. For now, I think it's time to play some more of the music, and then we'll get into all the different tracks. There are 8 different tracks in the game, each in a different country. These tracks fall into one of 3 categories: high speed, technical, and semi-technical. As I said before, each track has its own best lap time and overall average time, each with initials, and these are saved to the cartridge. I'm going to describe each track, the class and scenery, and approximate length, and also the default record times. The defaults here are the same for both average and best lap times. Surprisingly, well, this was a surprise to me before I really started looking into it, all of these tracks are based off of real-world courses in their respective countries. Well, a couple I couldn't positively ID, but the others, they do definitely match up. The track lengths I'm going to read off are approximations derived from my own testing of the game, and these do not match up to the track's real-world counterparts. Checked them all, and they're all pretty far off. That'd be pretty cool if they matched up, though. Also, each racetrack in the game has its own music, so I'll be including that as well. America, presumably the United States thereof, has a 1.6-mile high-speed track that you race around the end of the day at sunset. This one is based off of the Laguna Seca track in California, and the song that plays is called Sunset Racers. The racetrack, at least in the game, is on the outskirts of a city whose towering skyscrapers you can see off in the distance beneath orange skies. Well, they start off orange, at least, but gradually darken as time goes on. You'll see the lights turn on in the city beyond, and not all at once, but more and more as the skies and everything else gets darker. There are color-coded elements along the sides of these racetracks, which include the shoulders of the road as well as the barrels beyond. These can be either red and white, blue or white, or yellow and white, depending on the track, and here in America they are red and white. Reminds me a lot of the road boundaries in pole position. Other things you'll see are the occasional throngs of people standing at the side of the road. Not a great idea there, people throngs. There are streetlights, tall chain link fences, deciduous trees, maybe like poplar trees, small clusters of, I'm going to call them cypress trees. There are several narrow 5-story towers of spectators, in addition to the covered spectator stands. A sold-out crowd. They heard that you were racing tonight. As time passes, the sky will grow darker as red-hued clouds drift overhead. When it gets dark enough, your motorcycle's headlight will turn on automatically. The default record time here is 44.76 seconds, set by the initials OLI, which I'm going to guess mean Olivier Nallet. In the island continent of Australia, you'll have a 1.3-mile technical track, and you're going to race at night. Like America, the music has a time-appropriate name, and here it's called Riding for the Moon. This is one of the 2 tracks that don't really look like any actual tracks that I could find around the world. It does have a vague resemblance to the Phillip Island circuit in Victoria, south of Melbourne, and the manual does mention Melbourne in the description of the track, so maybe this is the Phillip Island circuit after all. But that doesn't fit with the scenery here on this track, because beneath the waxing gibbous moon hanging low over the horizon, you can see the Sydney Opera House and the Sydney Harbour Bridge, along with the city skyline. Skyline doesn't really match downtown Sydney, though. In fact, this perspective from which you're viewing the city, the only way that it would look like this would be if you were out in the harbor. I mean, I went through my photos and found a picture that pretty well matches the relative positioning of these 2 landmarks, the Opera House and the bridge, and I was on a boat at the time, a ferry, going out to Manly. Pretty sure I didn't pass any racetracks. Fort Denison is kind of in the area, but it'd be pretty hard to hide a racetrack there. Anyway, the starting line, and by wild coincidence the finish line as well, has a long row of covered spectator stands on the right, and some blocky buildings on the left. Maybe they're garages or something, with lit windows upstairs. There's a taller one in the center that has a balcony with some people watching the race. The barriers are blue and white here down under, and you'll encounter a large number of tall conical rock formations, kind of like the pinnacles way over in Nambung National Park, like the whole other side of Australia, but transported here to this floating racetrack here in Sydney Harbour because scenery. I sound critical, I don't mean to be critical. It's a striking track, perhaps the most distinctive of all the ones in the game, and I tend to race better here than anywhere else in the game, so I'll lay off the snark. There are more chain link fences and more trees, but these trees are rather leafless and naked. At about the halfway point, you'll drive under a sign that says "Do the Math" in giant capital letters, kind of a Atari 2600 style color bands. There's one more tower standing all alone with its lights on, maybe for TV cameras or something. The default record here is 42.96 seconds, set by somebody with the initials TAL. Although, like the last track, I don't think these are actually initials. I think that's the first name of lead tester Tal Funkabilu. Brazil has a 1.25-mile technical track modeled after Interlagos in Sao Paulo. You start just before dawn, when it's always darkest, and the song that plays is once again on the nose here, being called Dawn of Victory. Skyscrapers off in the distance have many lights on when you start the race, with the road initially surrounded on both sides by covered bleachers. The blue and white barriers lead you past palm trees lining the road, and soon you'll pass under several signs, I think around 16 in total, which alternate between Atari in colorful letters and Stellar X, with the latter being, at this point, the name of Shen's next title. There are rows of those blocky 2-story garage-looking things, just like we saw in Australia, and as you approach the finish line, you'll find a long stretch of covered spectator stands along the left-hand side, soon joined by more on the right. A lot of people here. As you race, the sun will rise, the world will get lighter, and the lights will go out. Gradually, not all at once. Your headlight, too, will turn off when it's no longer needed. You'll see that it's a rather nice, partly cloudy day with deep green hills nearby and a large body of water reaching the horizon. The default record in Brazil is 39.45 seconds, set by HAK, who I'll assume was tester Harry Kinney. Alright, check this out. Bishop. Load program Quick Maple.
Quick Maple confirmed.
Run program.
Oh, Canada. Your track is a high speed.
Alright, good job, Bishop.
Any other national anthems you'd like to make me butcher?
I think we're good for today, thank you.
Yay.
This 1.4 mile course looks... I was joking, people. This 1.4 mile course looks a little bit like Circuit-Gilles-Villeneuve in Quebec, but I'll admit that's a bit of a stretch. But when you're racing in Canada, you'll be listening to a song called Off Limit. This is the first track with green grass on the sides. America had kind of a dead grass color surrounding the asphalt. Australia was brown, but a little bit too dark to tell what was going on there really, and Brazil looked sandy. Canada is beautiful. There are majestic snow-covered mountains off in the distance, lakes in the foreground surrounded by grassy plains and tree-capped hills. Small puffy clouds flow through a deep blue sky. You start out surrounded by covered stands with cheering fans, with a tower on the left which looks a lot like the one in Australia, but the lights aren't on, because it's daytime. This track has red and white barriers and rows of tall evergreen trees clustered in groups of 3. At one point in the race, you'll drive under a sign that says Racing Heat, followed by one that reads 64-bit power. After rows of spectators on both sides, you'll drive under 8 more of those Racing Heat signs. You might even glimpse an airship, a blimp with red, yellow, gray, blue, and purple strips running horizontally down its length. The default record here is set by ALX. Musician Alexandre Etienne would be my guess at 41.86 seconds. Now we come to Shen's native France on a 2.1 mile semi-technical track clearly based off of Circuit de Nevers in Magny-Cours. Here we'll be racing to the song Quicksilver. This is the first track with yellow and white barriers and boundary markers, and the only track with a charming French village and chateau off in the distance, between low green hills in the foreground and taller brown hills beyond. There are a few clouds in the sky and definitely one hot air balloon. There are trees here too, looking a lot like the ones in America, which I called poplar trees, but don't quote me on that. What do I know about trees? They could be walnut or chestnut trees, I suppose. I don't know. There are chain link fences here too. Those are a lot less ambiguous to interpret. You'll also drive under some more signs here, these alternating between Do the Math and Stellar X, 10 signs in total. Oh, and there's a nice green grass along the track too. The record here in France by default is Dan, D-A-N, at 55.89 seconds. D-A-N could be Atari tester Dan McNamee. Next up is Germany. This high-speed track looks a fair bit like GP Strecke in Nürburgring. Not exactly, but close enough. In Germany, we listen to Always on the Run. If you're thinking, the grass is always greener on the other side of the Rhine, you'd be wrong, because it's more of a pale green here in Germany. But like France and Hungary later, there are no overhangs shielding the spectators from the sunlight. Must be how they roll in Europe. As far as scenery goes, you'll have green rolling hills with a couple of cottages placed here and there. There's a huge row of those blocky gray garage things along the left side of the road before and after the starting line. And a lot of what in America I called poplar trees. Also like America, the barriers here are red and white. Unlike America, unless I missed something, Germany has a hot air balloon, and there are some overhead signs here too. The first one reads 64-bit power, and there's a standalone one here reading Racing Heat, followed a little while later by 8 more of the same. The default high score is 44.69 seconds, held by ELY, I'm guessing Olivier Nallet, Shen's co-founder and Super Burnout's art director and project manager. The penultimate track is in Hungary, a 1.9 mile course where they jam to a song called Power of Speed. This is a semi-technical track with yellow and white borders, and the shape totally looks like Hungaroring in Moggervold. The grass on the sides of the road is a deep green, and one of the darker hills beyond has a sprawling castle at its base. Not sure which one, exactly. Schlossberger, maybe. Way off in the distance you may see mountains, many of which are partially covered in snow. The road is lined with pine trees in some places, and less natural walls of chain link fences in others. You'll pass under signs bearing the Atari name and logo, alternating with other signs reading Speed Demon. The default record here was 50.78 seconds, set by LJL, who could be none other than Lance J. Lewis, our favorite colonial marine. Keep heading east from Hungary, and maybe a little bit south, and you'll end up in Japan, the site of our last course, which is a 1.6 mile technical track based off of Okayama International Circuit. And here we'll be listening to Unlimited Skid Marks. Way off in the distance, you'll see the towering Mount Fuji, which, in real life, I'm pretty sure is totally not visible from Okayama. Off to the north is a small village, or large temple, or both. I couldn't tell if it was modeled after a real place. What you see, though, looks like a couple of multi-tiered Buddhist pagodas rising above shorter buildings. To the east, you'll see a more modern city just over the low green hills. You'll encounter a blimp on this track, over the track, and several overhead signs bearing the Atari logo, and others with the word revenge. Not sure what that's about. Everywhere, though, cherry trees are in full bloom. This is the only place where you'll see these pink-hued trees. In the game, at least. In real life, there were thousands of Yoshino cherry trees gifted to the United States by the mayor of Tokyo in 1912, and planted around Washington, D.C. Well, that's the second batch. The first batch, around 2,000 trees, were infested with insects, and President Taft reluctantly ordered the trees burned in 1910. Bit of history for you. I totally had to look this up. This isn't something I know off the top of my head. What am I, an actor in an Aaron Sorkin TV show? The racetrack here in Japan, which is what I'm talking about, honest, has blue and white road boundaries and barriers, and the default record on this track is set by Joe, J-O-E, I'm guessing tester Joe Souza, at 50.44 seconds. In championship mode, you'll race each of these tracks in order, and after finishing Japan, you'll get the championship results screen, which has its own music. The screen is pretty plain. You have a background with a black to blue gradient, and scrolling white text which shows each country and your finishing position and points awarded. At the bottom is your points total, the letter grade rank, and the text description. That's when it stops scrolling. Once you hit a button, it fades to black and then fades to white, and you get the end credits. I'm not going to do any spoiler alert in this episode because even if you finish in 7th place across the board and get a grade of F, you'll still see the same credits as if you got a grade of A. It's quite a scroller too. It has more than just credits. So I'm going to describe more or less the whole thing now, starting with the music. You start with the Shen logo, blue text with negative kerning sliding in from the right. This thing is huge. The text is a blue gradient, it has golden edges and casts a large shadow. After a couple seconds it scrolls up, followed by the text, gray text, all uppercase, with the drop shadow, and despite many of the words requiring them, there are no diacritics in this font. The text starts out with Super Burnout staff, producer, art director, and project manager, software engineer, graphic artist, finishing art, music, lead tester, other testers, and logo design. That's all pretty straightforward. Then we have a few special thanks, including Damien Kabadi for his real male voice. There must be some backstory there that I don't have. Olivier Nallet for all the time he spent testing the game, and Loic Duval for his support all along. There are some more thanks here, including the Street Fighters of the Apocalypse, no idea what that is, RGB Force, ditto, and finally, anybody who played this game and gave it a chance. I'm going to read this next section verbatim. Once again, many thanks to all the people who were involved in this project but were unknown to us. We won't forget. Yeah, I guess you can't forget what's unknown to you. Anyway, we get to the current Shen family, beyond those who just worked on Super Burnout, including 5 software engineers, 3 graphic artists, and a musician. Interestingly, for this part of the credits and only this part, these are listed last name first, like last name, comma, first name, but without the comma. This part is followed by their best racing times for each track. These are quite a bit better than the ones that I listed off for the per track defaults. For America, 33.76 seconds. Australia, 31.56, Brazil, 29.43, Canada, 30.63, France, 45.01, Germany, 34.69, Hungary, 40.15, and Japan, 39.70. The scroller goes on to say that Tal and his crew, the guys at Atari, are responsible for Brazil and Germany. The rest of them, though, those were set by Olivier Nallet. We learned that Monsieur Nallet is an old gamer who has the habit to be the best at any video game he plays. The scroller goes on to say that we'd like to teach him humility, but we're not strong enough. It then implores, please beat him for us, with 4 exclamation points. Our next production, it says, is on its way, watch out for it. All we can say is it's going to be blasting. This is, of course, Stellar X, which was renamed to Nexus. This is hinted at again later in the scroller with a couple parts that were written in French, and these translated read, with Super Burnout you have seen what we can do on the Jaguar with 3D bitmaps. The next game will show what we can do with sprites. The scroller closes with, that's all for the talking, we thank you for playing this game and wish you much fun. And if you wait a bit, you'll see goodbye, and a little while later, au revoir, followed by sayonara, and auf Wiedersehen, and ciao, and hasta la vista, each with a couple seconds in between. Then that's followed by, what? You're still around? So curious you are. And then the part that I just mentioned, written in French. And finally, play video games, be happy, stay in school, stay cool, can't type anymore, salut, and flatline. The whole thing takes about 5 minutes and 20 seconds if you wanted to stick around for it all. If not, I transcribed the entire thing and will include that in the show notes. You control Super Burnout with the official Atari Jaguar handlebar controller. Oh, you don't have one of those? That's okay, they don't exist. Instead, let's try the regular Atari Jaguar controller, either the standard 3-button model or the Pro Controller, which, while this game predates the release of the Pro Controller by several months, it is designed with the Pro Controller in mind, though the manual calls it the Atari Enhanced Jaguar Controller. The directional pad, left or right, will turn your motorcycle in that direction. Up and down by themselves don't do anything while you're racing. The default button assignments are the A button for your brake, B to accelerate, and C... Well, let's talk about your transmission first. Your motorcycle, whichever one you choose, may be equipped with either an automatic or a manual transmission. Automatic is the default. But if you've opted for the manual transmission, hold C and push up on the directional pad to upshift, and hold C and push down to downshift through the 6 gears. Alternately, and this is where the Pro Controller comes in, push 4 to downshift or 6 to upshift. On the Pro Controller, 4 and 6 are mapped to the left and right shoulder buttons, respectively, so L to downshift and R to upshift. The Option button from the title screen or the main menu will take you to the Options menu. The Options menu is where you set the intelligence of your opponents, how many laps you have to complete for each race. which race mode you want, trainer versus championship or record, and you can also choose your motorcycle from here. This isn't the only way to get to these options, it's just a shortcut. In gameplay, the option button does absolutely nothing. The pause button is like the opposite. It does nothing in the menus, but does something in gameplay, and that something is pausing the gameplay. I know, right? While the game is paused, you can adjust the volume levels by holding either A, B, or C, and then adjusting a slider with the directional pad left or right. A is for music, B adjusts the sound effects, mostly the racing sounds, and C adjusts the voice volume. If you push 1 and 3 at the same time, it'll hide the paused graphic, but you have to hold the buttons down for it to stay hidden. On the title screen, if you hold down Star, Option, and Hash, you'll reset the cartridge memory, which restores the factory default game configuration settings and high scores and volume levels. Joypad config too. You'll see the text cartridge memory cleared on the screen. 3 exclamation points. Bubsy would be proud. And of course, the Star and Hash buttons, when held down, will reset the game to the title screen without having to get up and push any buttons on the console. So yeah, take that, Super Nintendo. I guess. The game starts out with some copyright text when you first boot it up. It's plain white text on a black background and says Super Burnout, copyright 1995 Virtual Experience, licensed to Atari Corp. Wait, Virtual Experience? They didn't make this game. But Shen Technologies wasn't an actual company yet. It was founded using the proceeds from the game itself. In the prototype version I mentioned earlier, this copyright text is different. It says Burnout, trademark and copyright 1995 Virtual Experience, but also an identical line which says the same thing but with the name Shen. So that was changed for the final release. But copyright text is boring. I've spent more time talking about it than it stays on the screen, which is about 3 seconds. You might be able to shave a fraction of a second off of the screen with a button press, but that could just be an inconsistency in my stopwatch thumb. The next thing that you see is a blue screen fading to black at the very top and bottom. More copyright text appears in the middle, and I'll read that shortly, worry not, but the title Burnout slides in from the right, filled yellow to orange. The word Super slides in from the left, the last second, in a scripty little yellow font, making the name Super Burnout. It's not just a static gradient filling the Burnout text, but actually an animated flame effect, which looks pretty cool. It seems procedurally generated too, not like a pre-rendered animation. The copyright text says licensed to Atari Corp with Atari in giant logo letters, and below this is the text conceived and developed by Shen, with a kerning impaired Shen logo also looming large over the text. At the bottom is the actual copyright 1995 Virtual Experience, that's spelled Xperience. Sometimes you'll see the name with an accent aigu over the first E, but that's not shown here in the actual game. At the bottom of the screen, where the background is blackest, you'll have text fading in and out. It'll either be yellow reading press A or C to start, or red saying press B for options. Pressing A or C will start the game with the last configuration used. Since this is stored to the cartridge, it applies across reboots. So, if the last time you played Super Burnout you were doing a tournament with 3 laps against strong drones riding the killing turtle, that's what you're going to get when you press A or C. To change this, to change the game mode or number of laps or difficulty or motorcycle, you need to press B. While the text on the screen says push B for options, what it really does is takes you to the main menu. But we're not going to do that. What we're going to do is wait for about 1.5 minutes for the attract mode to kick in. Starting now. Okay, maybe we won't wait that entire time, but when it does kick in, you'll hear the selection sound. As if triggered by unseen thumbs, the screen will fade out and you'll see a random track in trainer mode. It'll play for about 5 seconds after a single lap is completed, and then it's back to the title screen for about 10 seconds. The next gameplay sequence shows a random track in versus mode, again lasting until about 5 seconds after the first lap. After another 10 seconds at the title screen, we'll see the best racers, about 4 seconds per track, again flipped through by unseen thumbs. It's kind of creepy. This whole sequence will repeat, trainer versus best racers, each with a title screen for 10 seconds between them, and each with a different random track. But after 4 of these full sequences, we'll get the Shen team credits, like you see at the end of the game in championship mode, but lasting only a little over a minute instead of the 5+ minutes you get with a full ending. Just long enough to get through the testers and the logo design. Before special thanks. Hitting the B button at any point in the attract mode will take you to the main menu. That's the only button that'll work, unless you're in one of those 10-second windows on the title screen, in which case you can press A, B, or C, or option. A and C, as I said, will start the race, but B is what we're going to focus on right now. The main menu has a bouncing set of Super Burnout logos in the background, a blue bouncing Burnout batch background. Yeah. In red text at the top it reads Super Burnout, and below that is a menu with 4 items in it. Yellow text if highlighted, white text if not. At the bottom of the screen in tiny letters it says press B to select, C to start. Now, this bottom of the screen text is super helpful for navigating through these menus because most anywhere you can choose an option or go back to the previous menu or fire up the actual game, and it helps to know which button does what. The menu here has best racers at the top, currently highlighted, followed by controls, then options, and finally sound. I'm actually going to start at the bottom and work my way up because a couple of the menu items are related in an unexpected way. So the last thing in the main menu is called sound, and from here you can either do a music test or change the audio mode between stereo and mono. If you choose the music test, the screen will fade to black and then emerge with red bouncing Burnout logos in the background and a whole list of song names that you can scroll through. The one in the middle has a white line above and below, and these lines fade to black, which seem to use the read modify write bit to give you some kind of inverse color against the background. It's easy to miss, but took some effort to add, so I had to point it out. A or B will start or restart the song, and C will go back to the main menu. Next item up from the bottom of the main menu is called Options, and from there we can adjust drones, strong, weak, or average, the number of laps, 2 through 7, and racing, record, trainer, versus, or championship. The directional pad left-right will cycle through them, and the B button will do the same. The last option listed here is Select Bike, and this isn't a toggle like the others, it'll take you to a separate screen. You have a picture of the motorcycle and rider in the top left corner, the name in the top right. The name is spread across 2 lines, the first line is yellow and the second line is red. Below the name and the picture you have the specifications, the grip, acceleration, and max speed. Left to right on the directional pad will flip between the different bikes. The B button makes your selection, and either A or C will go back to the options menu. You can't go right to the race from here with C. If you selected Versus mode in the previous menu, the Select Bike screen looks a little different. You'll start with Player 1 at the top of the screen in white text. Once Player 1 has chosen his ride, that text somewhat predictably changes to Player 2, and the second controller is able to take over. Both players can choose the same motorcycle, but in the race, Player 2 will have different rider colors. The bike's color is the same. Back at the main menu, above Options, we have Controls, and this one's a little weird at first. It says Controller 1 at the top, and below that, you have at least 4 options justified center. Button A, Button B, Button C, and Transmission. You move the D-pad up or down to choose what you want to change, and then press left or right on the D-pad, or push the B button to toggle between the 3 assignments, either accelerate, brake, or nothing. Not blank, nothing. The text says nothing. The tricky part here is that you can't have 2 buttons that do the same thing, so changing one could, and probably will, change another one on you. So let's say that you've set A the way you want it, and then you go down to B and start cycling through the assignments for B. Once you overlap A's assignment, it'll change A on you. This part really could have been done better. At the bottom, when you change the transmission from auto to manual, the button assignment named Nothing changes to the word Gear, and then back to Nothing if you go back to auto. If you had set the game mode to Versus in the options menu, you have something a little different here. At the bottom below the transmission, you'll have the text Continue, which lets you swap to controller 2, and then the second joypad will take over. It's It's great that both controllers can be configured independently, even the different transmission option, but there's no way to go back to controller 1 from here. Instead, you have to go back to the main menu first, and then back into controls. How do you do that? Well, the small text at the very bottom tells you, press A to exit, or you could press C to start the race. Again, in versus mode, the text at the bottom is slightly different. It'll specifically say that player 1 needs to press start. Player 2 cannot start a race. Sorry, player 2. We end our tour of the main menu at the top with the best racers. Unlike all the other main menu items, selecting this one will fade the screen to black, and when it comes back up, you'll have a waving black and white checkerboard pattern in the background. The red text reads Best Racers at the top, and the rest of the text is all white. In the middle, you have the name of the country, followed by the average time and best time. Each of these timers has the initials and best time in the format minutes, apostrophe, seconds, double quote, hundredths of a second. The format might look a little odd to us Americans who aren't used to listing time this way. We could do minutes, colon, seconds, decimal, hundredths, but if you're used to doing coordinates, degrees, minutes, seconds, it's formatted a lot like that in this game with a tick and double tick for minutes and seconds. Anyway, America is up there by default. You can push right on the D-pad to move through the countries in alphabetical order, or left on the D-pad for a reverse alphabetical order. Behind the text, in front of the checkered flag, we have the diagram of the course. And when you flip from one track to the next, the text will slide off to the side and the track diagram will dissolve into a cloud of pixels and reform into the next track's shape. It's really sharp looking, a very cool effect. Press B to exit this and go back to the main menu. Okay, let's say you actually want to race here in this racing game. How do you do that? Well, for the most part, within these menus, it's going to be the C button. So let's do that, and I'll let you know what happens. First, if you're in any mode other than Championship, you'll be able to select the track where you want to race. This is done with the same bouncing background as the rest of the menus, and you see a track outline in white and the country name and track type in yellow text. It uses a font that I've commonly seen called Piano, true type font, for the name and track type. You see this font out in the real world, too. It'll turn up, watch for it. I'll include a link to this font in the show notes because I can. Another thing you might notice here is a red marking. This shows the starting line and racing direction. Australia, Brazil, and Japan race counterclockwise. Everywhere else is clockwise. The maps on the Best Racers screens don't have this little starting mark. Use your directional pad left or right to cycle through the available tracks, the cool dissolve and rebuild effect. Convenient instructions at the bottom for which button does what. Once you select your track, or have it selected for you in the case of Championship mode, there's a brief pause while things load up, and then you zoom in toward the starting line, from behind, not above. You see your racer there with one foot on the ground, just like all the other racers, depending on the game mode. So let's take a quick look at what you see along the top of the screen before the race kicks off. Single player mode first. In the top left corner, you have the lap counter, 1 of 4, 2 of 3, whatever. Listed below this is the time recorded for each lap. The current lap is shown in blue, prior laps are in yellow, except for your best time, which is in red. Just left of center, you have the position, a giant number showing which place you're in, 1 through 7. To the right of this is the map, with dots representing your position, as well as the position of everyone else on the track. You're the red dot, everyone else are yellow dots. The leader, the one in first place, will be flashing. In the top right corner is your tachometer, 15,000 RPM tach with a red line at 12,000. If your bike has an automatic transmission, it'll shift before it hits redline. On manual, you can go all the way up into the red, especially going downhill. I've made it pretty close to the maximum 15,000 RPMs. Kids, don't try this in real life. Embedded in the tach, lower right corner, you have your speed. If you're using a PAL region Jaguar, it'll be shown in kilometers per hour. For NTSC consoles, it's miles per hour. If you're using a manual transmission, the gear will be shown right above the speed. Your motorcycle's equipped with a 6-gear transmission on manual. You'll hear,
"Ready, set, go!"
and the race will start. There are no false starts here. You can lay down on the gas and won't be able to go until...
Go!
Yeah. There's an indoor electric go-kart track my kids have been to a couple of times, and they're able to throttle or completely disable each car on the track remotely. So maybe there's something like that going on here in Super Burnout, except with gas engines. Not sure how that would work, but it does. You'll notice as you drive around the track that parts of the road are darker than others, a dark streak caused by the rubber laid down by countless motorcycles before you. This is the optimal path when taking it 100 miles per hour. It's kind of where you want to be. It's the road more traveled. Take that, Robert Frost. At the end of the race, the camera, which has been following pretty close behind you the whole way, stops, and your motorcycle zooms on ahead, reducing in speed, but still pretty quick. Fun fact, any competitors who have finished ahead of you will pull off the track on the right some distance past the finish line. They'll just pull off to the side and stop and wait for you in finishing order, so whoever finished first will be the farthest ahead when pulled off to the side. If you're like a full lap behind or more, you can come up behind these overachieving racers and run into them. If you're driving below 50 miles per hour, you don't actually crash when you run into something on the side of the road, so at low speed, you can push these guys forward. My son found that hysterical, messing with these other motorcycles like that. Once you complete a race, and they will wait for you no matter how long it takes, you get the race statistics screen, which is a lot easier to read than it is to say. There's a silhouette of a motorcyclist on a red background, kind of like a long focus photo of a rider at sunset, slightly blurry, artistically blurry. To the left, you'll see your finishing place in large letters with a chrome-like font. It's overlapped by some text at the top and bottom, which shows your average time, best time, and overall speed. All of the text is in white except if your average time or best time breaks a record, in which case that line is yellow. You'll be able to enter your initials at the bottom of the screen, 3 characters, A through Z, 0 through 9, and also an exclamation point, ampersand, or hyphen. Up and down to cycle through the available characters, left or right on the D-pad to choose the initial. The selected one will be flashing. If you're in championship mode, you're on to the next track, first showing the best racer screen I described earlier. In record or trainer modes, you'll see the best racer screen for that track, and then you'll get the option to move to a different track. The versus mode interface is kind of different, understandably so, since now you have a split screen interface, player 1 up top, and player 2 not up top. All the indicators are clustered around the center, above and below a thin black line separating the two screens. From left to right, you have the lap number and time. At center, you have the speed and position, first or second. And at the right is the track map. The map is shared between the two players, everything else they get separately. In the map, though, you can tell the two players apart because their dot color matches the primary color of the rider. After the versus race, you still get the dramatic red sunset picture of a motorcyclist, but this time with player 1's average and best times at the top, and player 2's at the bottom. The chrome-like first or second label appears in the top left corner for player 1, or the bottom right corner for not player 1. There's still room here to enter initials for lap records if you earn the privilege to do so.
Ready, set, go!
The game is presented largely as two-dimensional sprites coming at you with a 3D perspective as you view your racer from a point of view behind and slightly above. Some of the roadside objects, especially the buildings and grandstands, they look like 3D polygons, but they aren't. Your avatar, some guy on a motorcycle, has multiple frames of animation as he leans one side or the other. A hard lean will leave his knee just inches off the ground, which is why I can't watch motorcycle racing. It makes me uncomfortable. Keep your patellas in place is all I ask. When stopped, his left foot will be down on the ground, and in motion, if you look closely at around 100 miles an hour, he'll duck down a little more because those are some serious speeds. Run into something at that speed and you'll crash. The driver flies off in a spectacular somersault, and the motorcycle slides off some distance on its side. The faster you're going, the farther you'll fly, and it's actually fun to watch. That sounds bad, but your driver's never injured. In fact, sometimes you'll see him immediately start to stand back up after a wreck. There actually seem to be two different crashing animations. One where you get the full somersault, and one where you see him start to stand back up. In either case, you don't have to see him retrieve or climb back on the motorcycle, but rather you have a jump cut to where you're back on the bike in the road. Under 50 miles an hour, as I said earlier, there's no crash. You just pass through roadside objects at those relatively low speeds. Another thing that happens at lower speeds, below 62 miles per hour or 100 kilometers per hour, is that you burn rubber. You lay down a dark track behind your tire as you accelerate, and there are little white puffs of smoke that emerge from where the rubber meets the road, as it were. The funny thing is that if you're using a manual transmission and never shift, you'll be laying down rubber the whole way. It doesn't stick around, though. By the next lap, it'll be gone. None of the computer opponents burn rubber, which is not something that you're likely to notice in gameplay. Except maybe now that I've mentioned it. Sorry. If you run off the sides of the road, your wheels will kick up clouds of dust and you'll lose speed. That's a big improvement over Supercross 3D, where you'll crash as soon as you venture off the track. Yeah, much more forgiving here in Super Burnout. There are several types of roadside arrow signs, a few overhead signs that span the road and have truss-like poles on either side, lots and lots of trees, and I already mentioned the barrels and roadside markings that come in one of 3 different color combinations depending on the track. There's a horizon off in the distance that spans all 360 degrees without repeating, but it doesn't seem to contain any levels of parallax. The sky layer is behind it, not as a single flat color, but with some fading near the horizon, which varies again depending on the track. There are usually clouds that move independently, basically drifting across the sky. The cloud movement is smooth, except when other motorcycles are nearby, when it becomes a little choppy. They can even stop their march across the sky altogether, but again, this is not something you're going to notice in gameplay. I only picked it up because I was testing out the AI behavior. My findings on that are coming up later. You have small hills and larger hills. An example of a larger hill would be in Hungary, where you're actually going downhill the last third or so of the track. Your motorcycle loses speed going uphill and picks up speed going downhill. And on that track in Hungary, this is kind of funny, to get the track lengths I read off earlier, I ran each track on a manual transmission in first gear. I wanted my measurements to be as accurate as I could get them, so I just stayed in first to keep my speed pretty much consistent. On the Killing Turtle, that meant about 52 miles per hour, except when going downhill in Hungary, when I was able to get up to 126 miles per hour in first gear. It's crazy. Also along those lines, when you cross the finish line, your speed decreases, except if you're staying in first gear when your speed actually increases beyond what's normally possible on ground level. I found it amusing. Maybe I'm just easily amused. The road itself has a texture to it which looks great in motion. Well, when you're in motion, the road doesn't actually move on its own. As I mentioned before, there's a dark streak along the track showing the optimal path at 100 miles per hour. It's not like a painted black line, but since it's supposed to be the part of the track that has more motorcycles on it, the darkness would naturally fade on either side, which it does. It doesn't look synthetic at all, just like a normal, real-world progression that comes from use. The starting line, aka the finish line, is an 8x8 checkerboard grid, white paint overlaid on the road texture. It's not subtle, which is good. Sometimes you'll come across dark, rectangular patches of the road made to look like some parts of the track had recently been resurfaced. It's the type of detail that you wouldn't miss if it wasn't there, but it is there, and as a result adds that much more realism. There's no texture on the sides of the road. Once you get past the markings on the side, no grass texture or sand texture, just solid colors that gradually darken as they approach the horizon. The movement is fast. I've read that the game is locked at 60 frames per second, and I have no reason to doubt that number. The sense of speed here in Super Burnout is truly convincing, and when you have hills mixed in with turns, mixed in with speed well north of 100 miles an hour, there is a definite pucker factor here. The sprites are large, your guy takes up about a third of the screen, and they cast shadows too, pretty much directly downward. I mentioned the headlight when it's dark out, and this can turn on or off automatically depending on the ambient light levels. Take that, Power Drive Rally. The headlight doesn't do much in terms of illumination, it's just a pool of yellow in front of you, but in a tight race, it does help to see the other racers right behind you. There's no rear view option in this game, no mirrors or anything, but you could see their headlight pool before you see them, so if you wanted to cut them off or whatever. Your motorcycle also has a functioning brake light, but no horn, so I guess Power Drive Rally wins that one. In fact, the sounds of the game largely consist of just motorcycle noises, and a separate crash sound, and a crowd noise whenever you're around the spectator-filled grandstands. But the standout sounds here are the voice samples, which tell you when to go.
Ready, set, go!
When you've achieved your best lap time for the race.
Best time.
When you've set a new record.
It's a record.
And how many laps remain.
6 laps to go. 5 laps to go. 4.
This part's a little repetitive, I'll just skip ahead.
2 laps to go. Final lap.
The voice, as I think I mentioned before, belongs to Damien Kabadi. Not a typical announcer voice, I'd have to say, but it's distinctive, if nothing else. The music in Super Burnout was made by Alexandre Etienne, and this is... before working on this episode, I never considered how rich and layered and clear the music is in this game. Other Jaguar games promise a CD quality soundtrack. I know Cybermorph and Raiden did, but Super Burnout, I think, delivers on that promise more than anything else. And a lot of that is because we're not talking about 4-channel Pro Tracker modules here, as good as those can sound. These are 10-channel music tracks with instruments sampled at 32 kilohertz. By way of comparison, the samples used in the Tempest 2000 soundtrack had a rate of 8 kilohertz. But wait, that's just the gameplay music. The title screen music, and I believe the credits theme as well, had up to 16 voices at 50 kilohertz. That's technically above CD quality for sampling rate. That's amazing. And the music has a very demo scene feel to it, I think. Unfortunately, it's pretty far down in the mix by default. Let me show you what I'm talking about. Audibly, of course. Here's some racing action with the default sound levels.
Go!
And here's how I like to run it, with the voice down 50% and the engine noise all the way down to about 30%, 1/3 its default volume.
Go!
I think it makes a big difference changing the sound mix like that, because I think this music really does sound great. And since I've been inserting it by itself throughout the episode without other sounds obscuring it, I hope you think so too. Unfortunately, the music does not play in versus mode, having 2 players on the screen rendering 2 horizons and all the sprites while locking in that high frame rate. It reduced the quality of the music, largely because the DSP has a lower priority on the 64-bit system bus than the GPU does. They could have maybe reduced the number of simultaneous voices in the music tracks, but largely in the interest of time, they removed the music altogether during 2-player mode. What you will hear in 2-player mode, well, if you have a stereo TV, is that each motorcycle has its own sound channel. I think player 1 is on the left and player 2 is on the right, but now that I'm recording this episode, I have to admit I didn't test that out specifically. But it sounds like this. Let's see, anything else on the graphics and sounds? I've got some random notes here, and I already might have mentioned some of these, but different countries have blue skies of different shades. The volume levels you set in-game don't seem to apply to the menus. Oh, this is an important one. In Versus mode, player 2 has a slightly larger window than player 1 does. I measured it to be roughly 46% of the screen for player 1, 53% for player 2, with about 1% in between. This is on an NTSC console. Maybe it's different for PAL. I've got some notes on the AI here as well. Now's as good a time as any to talk about the intelligence of the drones. One thing I like to do to test the AI in driving games is to park myself right in the way of the computer opponent and see what they do. Do they go around, or do they run into me repeatedly until I'm pushed out of the way? Checkered Flag and Power Drive Rally totally failed this test. Supercross 3D was so jerky it was really hard to tell, but try as I might, I could not get the drones to crash into me. Now, in the course of a race, I do sometimes cause a drone to crash, and it's hysterical, really, catching a brief glimpse of somebody right behind you flying off their bike. Don't get me wrong, they're fine, they're okay, they're also not real, but it's a pretty rare occurrence, and when I try to block them, when I try to become a roadblock, parking myself right in the middle of the black stripe or swerving back and forth across the road at low speed, they go around me. Even if that means swerving off the road to avoid a crash, they go around. Also, watching the drones in the race, each one does different things. They lean at different times or move to different parts of the road. One exception, though, is during the attract mode. A few minutes in, there's the gameplay footage of versus mode. Both bikes in versus mode do the same things. They stick to the same parts of the road. If one drives off the road for a half second at the apex of some bend, the other one will drive off the road for a half second at the apex of that bend. Their behavior's exactly the same. What that could mean, well, there's a couple things that I think that could mean. One is that they're both riding the same bike, it seems, and maybe each motorcycle has its own pattern, its own behavior. In an actual race, everybody has different colors, and though these color combinations don't necessarily match up to what you can select when choosing your bike, maybe the rider color isn't the key. Maybe it's the motorcycle color they're on, and maybe every motorcycle color has a different behavior. Mix in different colors with the 6-drone race, and everybody appears to be doing different things. In the Versus demo, I've only ever seen the same color motorcycle for both players, and they behave the same. So that's one possibility. The other possibility I came up with is that it's just a demo and who cares. Super Burnout has a few cheat codes listed on Atari Age. The in-game codes can be chained together, so they'll work simultaneously, and these will work until the Jaguar console is powered off. The first is a secret hidden motorcycle called the Punisher. On the title screen, if you enter the code 21794 on the keypad, you'll hear this sound. And then when you go into the select bike screen, you'll find the Punisher listed between Sliding Thunder and the Killing Turtle. The Punisher gives you high grip and high acceleration with a maximum speed of 218 miles per hour, or 349 kilometers per hour. This makes it overall the best bike in the game. It doesn't quite have Sliding Thunder's top speed, but I'd definitely take high grip and high acceleration over a slightly higher maximum speed. The Punisher itself is a silver color, and the rider's jumpsuit is pink and white. Well, that's what I have in my notes, but my daughter saw that and insisted, it's not pink, it's salmon. She hasn't even seen that episode of Friends. Didn't Wreck-It Ralph also make that joke referencing that episode? She has, of course, seen Wreck-It Ralph repeatedly. Anyway, yeah, Punisher, great bike. It doesn't survive a hard reboot, though, as I said, so if you turn off your Jaguar, you'll have to re-enter the code to get it back. And even though the bike's a bit of a cheat, the game does allow you to set track records with it. I have read that you can unlock the Punisher without the cheat code by earning an A rank in championship mode. The text in the end scroller seems to indicate this, reading, "You can experience racing with all the available bikes." But when I tried it, I got an A rank, 137 points in championship mode, racing on average drone difficulty, 2 laps per track, and it did not unlock the Punisher for me. Maybe you need to do more laps for it to work, or a higher difficulty, or maybe you need to not cheat your butt off like I did using one of the other cheat codes. I don't know. The next cheat code, not the one I just hinted at, is a turbo mode, kind of like a nitrous oxide boost. Enter the code 19672 on the title screen and you'll hear, and when you enter a race with the automatic transmission, press and hold C for a huge burst of speed. The caveat is that your motorcycle needs to be going at least 175 miles per hour, so that rules out using turbo on motorcycles like the Super Rabbit, or Killing Turtle, or Reflex Z. I can pull it off with the Wheels of Terror, though, like on the final straightaway in Canada.
Best time!
They say that you can get up to 343 miles per hour, which is crazy, but it's not something I've been able to pull off myself. Track records are also disqualified, which makes sense. One more cheat on Atari Age is if you hold down A, B, and C on controller 1 while turning on the game, you'll see the version number on the license and copyright screen. It doesn't have to be when you turn on the game, and it doesn't have to be all 3 buttons. You can push and hold down A and C during the Atari jingle when it's booting up, and it'll work just the same. The production version of the game should show Super Burnout v2.97, May 25th, 1995. Neither of the prototype versions I was able to find have this cheat code enabled, so I can't tell when those were built. I'm told that if you do this on a PAL region Jaguar, it'll put the game in a 60 Hz mode, flaunting the PAL standard of 50 Hz. So I guess it would give PAL region Jaguars the higher number of frames per second that we get on our NTSC consoles. I couldn't test that. There's a third in-game cheat code that exists, one where you can instantly move to the head of the pack. Atari Explorer Online editor Travis Guy hinted at this in the August 1995 review of the game, and it came up again in 1998 when Clay Hallowell asked lead tester Tal Funkabilu about the code. Tal said that yes, it existed, but he didn't remember what it was. The rumor is that it wasn't released with the other codes because it tended to crash the game, but Mr. Funkabilu didn't recall the game crashing as a result of the code. In 2007, though, thanks to Orion, SCP-CD, and I suppose all of Jaguar, this long-lost cheat code was finally released. Enter the code 8269 on the title screen. You'll hear this sound. And in gameplay, pushing the 8 button on the keypad or the Y button on the Pro Controller will instantly move you to the head of the pack. Well, that's not true. It doesn't move you to the front so much as it stuffs everybody else behind you. They'll all keep their current speed, their position just changes to your immediate 6 o'clock, even if they've already finished the race. You can use this early and often before a race even begins if you want, but the rumor is correct. This game can definitely crash using this, especially if you use it just before you cross the finish line. So you can use this to put yourself in first place, but you can also really mess with the game. Let me give you an example. Start a race in one of the modes with computer opponents, preferably with only 2 laps, because what you're going to do is stay put. You let everybody else finish the race, and they'll stop some distance down the track after finishing. Once everybody has stopped, hit the 8 button to stuff them behind you, and they'll remain stopped, but since they're behind you, that puts you in first place, and they stay stopped behind the finish line. Go ahead and do a lap like this, but slow down as you reach the finish line. You'll see everybody else stopped on the side of the road. Start ramming into them, pushing them forward. Once you push them past the finish line, they'll start driving around the track at 30 miles per hour, but with one foot still on the ground. They'll pass through any obstacles too, barrels, buildings, people. They just keep going like this, around, driving at 30 miles per hour with one foot still on the ground. It's pretty funny. They can take first place away from you, though, eventually, if you hold still and let them lap you again. This code works in versus mode as well, also with crazy and sometimes hilarious results. It works for both players. I use this to drag player 2 behind me for some distance down the track, yet player 2's foot never left the ground. Doing this repeatedly caused all roadside sprites to disappear from player 2's screen. They weren't just invisible, they didn't exist, and he could go all the way to the edge without running into anything. In the end, player 2 somehow finished with an average lap time of 30 minutes, even though I only messed with it for about 5. Another fun glitch we found, my son and I, when playing in versus mode, is that we were repeatedly sending each other behind us, and he somehow ended up with a lap time of 2 seconds. Yeah, 2 seconds.
It's a record!
Yeah, good luck beating that record, Olivier Foubert. The box for Super Burnout features a rather nice illustration, a nearly head-on view of 2 motorcycle riders with determined concentration in their eyes and flames apparently under their tires. A winding road with green hills extends into the background. The logo of the game and the lead rider extend out into the thick black border that runs along the left and bottom edges of the Jaguar game box. The screenshot in the lower left corner shows the Germany track going around a bend with 3, 4, 5 other racers on the screen. It's 51 seconds into lap 1. Also on the front, you see the Atari logo, the ESRB rating, and the icon indicating 1 or 2 players. On the back of the box are 4 more screenshots, and in clockwise order from the top left, there's a 2-player race in France, a crowded field in the waning daylight of the America track, another picture from Germany, and, well, this one's odd. It's in Canada, and looks like the race is just starting out. You're behind the starting line in 7th place. I think you can see all 6 other bikes in front of you, and your speed is like 6 miles per hour, but it shows that you're actually on lap 3 of 7. Something's not right there. Anyway, this is a typical 3-language box, and typical for me, I'll read the English translation and skip the German and French ones. It reads, "Open the throttle and let her rip. This game will get your adrenaline pumping and pin you to your seat with its G-force. As you lean into the first bend, you'll feel like you're really there. Go for it. Twist the throttle hard and ride that curve like a pro." Here's some bullet points. Choose from 6 great custom sport bikes. Pit your skills against 8 of the world's meanest racetracks. Race against a computer or go head-to-head with a friend for a true competitive experience. Take the ride of your life on these fantastic bikes. The back of the box also features the Atari logo and the Virtual Experience Octopus logo. The cartridge label features part of the box art, but with a black stripe along the right edge, with the logo overlapping that. The label also includes the ESRB rating and a block of copyright text. It's a 3-language manual here, a monochrome stapled booklet that looks pretty much like every other Jaguar manual, about 18 pages per language. It's laid out well enough, nearly every page includes a screenshot, and the manual includes things like options, racing modes, a list of the motorcycles and tracks, and the controls. There's a single page for how to play, and a few tips. The dark mark on the track shows a perfect trajectory at 100 miles per hour. Always be on the inside when entering a turn. You'll be able to slide without leaving the track, and you won't lose crucial speed. Never hesitate to reduce your turn's radius by going on the grass or the sand just before the turn. If you don't stay there too long, your speed will be reduced just enough that you can turn without causing an accident. This technique works best on hairpin turns with minimal loss of speed. When you hit or bump a challenger, you'll only fall if the speed difference between your bike and his bike is very high. Some oils stay on the track after a crash. Avoid the oil or your bike will lose grip for the first 5 seconds back in the saddle. Wait, oils? Shinto didn't say anything about oil. What kind of cut rate podcast is this, anyway? I don't know. I've done my share of crashing in this game, believe you me, but oil on the road, that's not something I ever encountered. You'll peel out just like you do on the starting line, but no, oil is not something I've ever noticed in gameplay. Yeah, that was me, see? Super Burnout was not included in the official Jaguar Gamer's Guide, but it did make an appearance in a couple of Jaguar ads. The first is the 2-page Best Games, Best System, Best Get Off Your Butt and Get One ad, which ran in the May 1995 issue of GamePro and Electronic Gaming Monthly, and possibly others. But along the right-hand side of this ad is a column for Coming Soon, which included Burnout. Remember, it wasn't Super just yet. And this included a single screenshot of the race just starting out on the track in France, and includes a quote from Video Games Magazine which reads, "Redefines the term high octane, the fastest motorcycle racing game bar none." The other ad that I have here is the one I mentioned in the Supercross 3D episode, Thumb Breaks 4 World Records, which is about a giant disembodied thumb that totally owned in 4 Jaguar sports games. For Super Burnout, we see the box art, and it looks like the screenshot of the Canadian track from the back of the box. The caption reads, "Riding one of 6 custom bikes, Thumb sets the world speed record. At 143 miles per hour, he's the fastest digit on the planet." 143 is kind of low, actually. That's just under the top speed of the Killing Turtle, a bike not necessarily known for its high velocity. I wonder why they went with that. That's not all we have in the way of Super Burnout advertisements. It was also part of Atari's First Alert postcard program for the Jaguar. This was, I believe, first announced at the Fun and Games press event on June 20th, 1995, and was mentioned in Atari Explorer Online the following month. Everyone who sent in their registration cards for the Jaguar were on this mailing list, and that included me. Their postcard campaign not only included Super Burnout, but also White Men Can't Jump, Ultra Vortec, and Flip Out, which I've already mentioned. There was a separate one advertising the Jaguar CD as well, and I'll talk about that more in a couple episodes. There might be one more that I missed, that I either didn't receive or didn't save from 25 plus years ago. The Super Burnout postcard has box art on the front with the Jaguar slash marks along a black stripe on the left edge and the text "Now available for" above the Jaguar logo. On the reverse, we have the logo again, plus a couple of screenshots and the text, "Ready to race the incredible speed of 60 frames per second? Then get set to pick up your copy of Super Burnout in stores this June. Super Burnout features 8 authentic racing tracks from around the world." And it lists the countries here. "Choose from 6 custom sport bikes of varying grips, acceleration, and speed. Race day or night against a computer or a friend. Choose championship mode to race on all 8 tracks against 6 opponents. Or try racing the clock to test your speed in record mode. Hold on tight, Jaguar owners. Super Burnout is just the beginning of the ride of a lifetime with the upcoming software from Atari Corporation. Check it out at your stores July 7. Shen Technologies SARL did get a shout out in the fine print. Well, like I said, make it a very, very quiet shout out. But that means it did exist as a corporate entity when the postcards were made. So, you've heard me talk about Super Burnout at length now, but after some more music, let's hear from the industry press, then and now, with reviews of the game. Super Burnout's reviews are kind of all over the place. Mixed is a good term, more favorable in recent times than they were back in 1995. I will cover some of both. So let's kick things off with our old friends at Electronic Gaming Monthly. September 1995, this was not a review crew game, but instead gathered together with the rest of the sports games, so it had 2 reviewers instead of 4. And on a scale of 1 to 10, we have a 5.0 and a 4.5. One of the reviewers said that the frame rate is something that needs improvement, and that it's definitely a step backward from games like Ridge Racer and Daytona. He didn't have any fun playing it. The other guy said that the graphics and animation are crisp, but, quote, you can't even hear the roaring engines, end quote, and that the handling of your bike is very frustrating. Huh, okay. GamePro magazine, July 1995, has a half-page review which gives the game the following scores on a scale of 1 to 5. Graphics 4.0, sound 3.5, control 3.0, and fun factor 3.0. The reviewer says that it's a well-crafted racer with several tracks, excellent graphics, and plenty of options, but that's about it. He talks about the game modes and praises the graphics, but says that the versus mode is a little tight since each player is the same size as in the one-player modes, which makes it difficult to see the road ahead. He likes the voices and the revving sounds and the customizable controls, but says that it lacks the spark of originality that would boost it to the head of the pack. There's room for one pro tip here, staying on the inside of turns, which I'd say is pretty standard for any racing game. Game Players Magazine, October 1995, has a full-page review of Super Burnout, saying that it boasts very little in the way of innovation in the genre, but what is there is done quite well. The graphics, he says, are far from dazzling and slant toward minimalism, but there's absolutely no draw-in, and the motion is as smooth as you could ask for. He closes out the review saying that it's definitely not head-turning the same way as Daytona USA or Ridge Racer might be, but it might end up pleasing a great deal of Jaguar owners with its exciting gameplay and sense of realistic motorcycle racing. The game is broken out into 5 categories on a scale of 1 to 10, with a high and low point written out for each. Graphics is rated a 7, everything here is sharp and well-defined, but there just really isn't much here. Sound and music is also a 7, the sound effects are pretty good, but the background music is pretty generic. Innovation is a 4, small touches like skid marks and dramatic crashes are nice, but even these elements have been done before. Gameplay is an 8, with a high point being the action is really fast and fun, and the downside is the choice of motorcycles helps to customize the action. Interesting downside. Finally, replay value is a 7, taking first place is no easy task, but the tracks are all pretty much the same. Let's see what's next. I've got a lot of reviews here. Let's do Die Hard Game Fan next. I think this was their June 1995 issue. There's a full-page review of Super Burnout here, but without any scores. What it lacks in scores, though, it makes up for in screenshots. I count 24 total pictures from the game. The reviewer, Takahara, likens the game to a 90s version of Super Hang-On, saying that Super Burnout looks like it's running on a powerful console. It's mightily impressive technically, with smooth animation, solid artwork, and brilliant color. It controls extremely well, and most importantly, Super Burnout is fun. It's pure racing joy. He can't find any flaws, and it delivers exactly what it's meant to. The screenshots include 4 of the motorcycles and 6 of the tracks. 6 of them are in versus mode. The tracks are all over the place, so it really looks like they put some time into this one. Hopping across the pond, we find Edge Magazine, July 1995, with a full-page review. Mostly screenshots, because the review itself is pretty short. It kind of asserts that Atari went with a sprite-based racing game because the polygon-based games, Club Drive and Checkered Flag, were, quote, disastrous. He says that the game fairly screams along with a smoothness that at least matches the standard set by Sega's sprite-based coin-ops. However, he says that the bikes are ill-proportioned, the track layouts are clinical, and the game has a generally crude appearance throughout. He says that it looks almost like a 16-bit game in places, but fails to match the playability of many 16-bit racers. Not because it doesn't control well, it's impressively responsive, he says, but because there are only 7 other bikes on the track with you, it's a diluted experience compared to something like Top Gear on the Super Nintendo, which, I checked on this, has 20 total cars on the track. The closing paragraph here says, technically, Burnout shows what the Jaguar can do. If Virtual Experience can get some gameplay into its next release, it could become a name to watch. Except, of course, that Virtual Experience didn't actually make this one. Also in the UK, Ultimate Future Games reviewed Super Burnout in their September 1995 issue. All I have is a blurry little scan of this skinny little review, but as small as this review is, they did fit in a surprising amount of snark, so kudos for that, I guess. Here's the headline: Another Jag game to crash and burn? The opening paragraph reads, imitation is the sincerest form of being a copying Git. Super Burnout, then, is extremely sincere. Look at the screenshots. Seem familiar, do they? Remember Super Hang-On? Now imagine it on what is supposed to be a, sigh, next-generation machine. Wouldn't be all that impressive, would it? Say no, Ultimate. Good. Bear this in mind as you move through the next 100 words. The review says that, apart from the rather superficial 2-player split-screen mode, all you're going to get from this game is choosing one of 6 bikes and racing through one of 8 courses and one of 4 modes. The reviewer concedes that the game is easy to pick up and play, and that the bikes do handle pretty well, but says that the gameplay suffers from a few very notable flaws. Crash once or use your brakes too often and you'll be playing catch-up until the cows come home. He says that the computer-controlled opponents would seem to be infallible. The review closes by telling Atari to pull its software out of 16-bit territory. Overall score 31% and a rating of uninspiring. Let's move on to Video Games, the Ultimate Gaming Magazine, before we start looking at the digital and non-English reviews. This is from their July 1995 issue. It's a full-page review with the title, A Horribly Dated Racing Game. If I can summarize the first 4.5 paragraphs, the main reviewer loved the pure and simple fun of Hang On in the arcade, but expected the genre to evolve more in the past 10 years than what is present in Super Burnout. He says that there are only about 8 or 10 roadside sprites in the whole game, and that the road itself reeks of 1986 because while it moves liquid smooth, it only offers 3 basic types: sharp left curves, sharp right curves, and straightaways. There are no tunnels, bridges, or ramp-type roads. No real innovation. He says that the skies and backgrounds look pathetic and remind him of work done by a 3-year-old in a watercolor book. He goes on to list out the different game modes, which he calls excruciating, and a torture session. There are no cash prizes to be won in the game, he says, which is a serious flaw because you can't upgrade your bike. He closes out the review saying, "One has to wonder why so many of Jaguar's games look and feel horribly dated. With an already suspect library of titles, Atari just seems to be adding fuel to the fire by releasing video game dreck like this. No thanks, I like the 90s. The scoring breakdown is on a scale of 1 to 10, with the graphics given a 4, sound and music a 7, and playability a 5. Overall rating, 5 out of 10. There are a couple other mini-reviews on this page from other editors, both giving the game 6 out of 10. The game size is listed incorrectly here. It says 4 meg. Just saying meg is kind of ambiguous. Are you talking about megabits or megabytes? The rest of the magazine quite obviously uses megabits for game sizes, as did the industry in general back then. So instead of 4, this should have been 16. It's a 16 megabit cartridge. Let's take a look at Atari Explorer Online, August 1995. The reviewer says that record mode is his favorite. It's fun to play with friends as you try to beat each other's records. The best thing about the game, he says, is the sheer speed, which can be quite exhilarating. He mentions the 6-button controller support, which I don't think any other reviewers did. He wasn't crazy about the 2-player mode since there are no drones, a limited viewing angle, and because Player 2 has a slightly larger window. He says the announcer's voice sounds tinny, and was disappointed that the headlight was a fairly useless round yellow spotlight. He suggests starting out with the Killing Turtle since it has no drift, and then graduate to the Super Rabbit or Reflex Z. In conclusion, he says that the game is an exhilaratingly fast and colorful game with excellent control. On a scale of 1 to 5, he gives graphics a 3.5, audio a 3, calling the music adequate. Control is a full 5, gameplay is a 4, and overall is 3 out of 5, a solid good rating. This score, 6 out of 10, increases to 7 out of 10, beginning with the first issue of Jaguar Explorer Online in March of 1997. Online magazine Game Zero, back in August of 1995, said that the game is a very strong arcade classic that has been translated very well for the Jaguar, by far the best racing game out for the Jaguar. There's no rating here, though. The Atari Times, August 1996, does have a rating. They have several, with graphics given 82%, sound and music 73%, gameplay 84%, for an overall score of 81%. The review itself, it's almost word for word the same as the GamePro review. It's so close that I think that Atari Times' Andy Robertson is the same guy as the GamePro's The Axe Grinder. Though I remember reading somewhere that the GamePro's editors used multiple aliases when writing reviews to make their staff seem bigger, so Andy Robertson could have been The Axe Grinder and several others. Electric Playground, with a November 1996 review, hates on the game, giving it a 3.5 out of 10, saying that it bores him to tears with nothing to offer video games in general. It looks like no one cared about this game enough to flavor it with anything interesting, he says. The pros are a 2-player split-screen mode, and that's it. 1 pro. For cons, he listed boring push left and right control, limited number of opponents and tracks, skimpy animations, and lame sound. I have some non-English reviews here with a solid assist, again, from Arithius of the Retro Gaming Connection. We'll start with a couple previews of the game, both from French magazine CD Consoles. First, November 1994, they include intergalactic exclusive photos of the game, 3 of them, with some text that mentions the 60 frames per second frame rate, and 19 separate sound channels, 1 for voice, 8 for sound effects, and 10 for music. They also say that it's possible to play up to 8 players using Comlink's networking. To be fair, Atari didn't announce the name of their networking peripheral Jaglink until January 1995 at the earliest. The next month, CD Consoles has a full-page preview with 7 pictures of the game, various shapes and sizes, and it opens with the text, "We hoped, but without really believing it. It arrived at the Beaujolais Nouveau," which Arithius very helpfully provides some context on this one. Beaujolais Nouveau is a traditional French wine that arrives every year on the 3rd Thursday of November. I totally didn't know that. But it goes on to say that the 64-bit hang-on is finally here, which is weird because this is December 1994 and the game wouldn't be released for several more months. And going off the screenshots, it's not the final build, but it does look pretty close. Anyway, the preview goes on to say, yeah, heck, I'll just read the whole thing. Shen, the young video game studio, arrives on the home console market. For their first game, they strike big with what could become one of the finest Jaguar games. Shen is currently working on a game that will bring a tear to all of those nostalgic of the now-defunct Super Hang-On. As you might have understood, it is a motorcycle racing game mostly focused on arcade feel. Rather than focusing on simulation aspect of the genre, the coders at Shen have decided to concentrate on the fun of the race. Willing to push the Jaguar to its limits, the developers have added lots of effects, night falling, reflection of the lights on the signal shields, controlled skids. 8 tracks will be available, and you'll have the possibility to play at 8 via the comlinks or 2 via split screen. As for the graphics, they are flawless. Huge sprites, beautifully animated, knee on the asphalt during turns, foot on the ground when you're standing still, and marvelous backgrounds displaying huge sprites on the screen. Animated in 1 VBL, that's 60 frames per second, the game suffers no slowdown and is actually very, very fast. Of course, the main goal of the game is to beat the best times. Needless to say, those of us here at the office will train hard to beat them. Still sticking with CD Consoles, they have an actual review of the game, February 1995. The game still actually wasn't done by then, but they've got a review anyway. 4 pages. And the last page of the review actually has some more detail on the Banshee audio sound system I mentioned earlier in the show. It's not some third-party system, but actually the name of the audio engine developed in-house by Shen. The review also says that there are 13 music tracks in 10-channel panoramic stereo at a sampling rate of 25 kHz, which is lower than what Olivier Nallet mentioned in his post on Atari Age, but still pretty good for a 2 MB cartridge that also includes a whole motorcycle racing game. Here's the summary of the review. When I think of all the money I could have saved during Super Hang-On, I would have bought a Jaguar in Super Burnout. It makes me sick. With a bit of melancholia, I take pleasure in racing through the most prestigious tracks of the world, beating their tour record. The option to play 2 or 4 players adds even more appeal to the game. Creativity 2 out of 5, playability 3 out of 5, graphics 3 out of 5, sound 3 out of 5, and potential 2 out of 5. Arithius, are you sure these are supposed to be out of 5? I mean, of course you know the magazine better than I do, but looking at page 4 of the review here, there's only enough room for 4 stars. Anyway, let's take a look at ST Magazine, September 1995. They wish the game had things like Jaglink, 2-player mode against the computer, and a real-time display of the gap with the competitor in front of you and behind you, rear-view mirrors on the motorcycle, and different weather conditions. But this isn't a negative review, no sir. They say that, like Tempest 2000, this is a must-have arcade-style game for the Jaguar. I'm paraphrasing a bit, but that's basically what it says. Checking out their ratings, graphics 85%, sound 85%, fluidity 85%, playability 85%, replay value 96%, you thought I was going to say 85 again, didn't you? And that all averages out to 87% overall. Joypad Magazine, September 1995, the reviewer says, "We are now quite accustomed to receive average games on the Jaguar, but we must also recognize that Super Burnout is one of a few remarkable games on the system. The polish of the game is perfect, such as the fluidity and playability. If you do not own Atari's 64 bits, do not resist, or you will condemn it irrevocably." Interesting phrasing. Pros include a good game on the Jaguar, great fluidity of the animation at 60 frames per second, and 2-player mode. Cons are only 8 tracks, and background is a little bit empty. Graphics, 15 out of 20. They are not the best, but they are consistent with what you see on the Jaguar. Animation, 18 out of 20. Without a doubt, the strength of the game. It is very smooth without any gap and provides an impressive speed sensation. Playability, 16 out of 20. There is a little learning curve, but once it is mastered, controlling your bikes becomes second nature. Sound effects, 15 out of 20. There's no revolution here. Classical engine noise and good music. Overall, 85%. French fanzine Jaguar has a review of Super Burnout in their first issue, not sure of the date, but it says, "This month our star is Burnout, a crazy motorcycle game in bitmap 3D done by some guys from our dear country. Great job, guys. We are looking forward to the sequel on Jag CD. You choose between 6 different bikes and 8 different tracks. You can play alone against the 6 opponents, or 2 with a split screen. The sound is really excellent for a cartridge, and the speed of the game is mind-blowing. It is really the top of the motorcycle racers, and it is fun. Graphics, 88%, good, but we can do better. Fluidity, 95%, just great. Sounds, 92%, marvelous, at least 20 voices in CD quality. Playability, 85%, very good. Overall, 92%. It is good to beat the opponents in the record times." German magazine Megafun, September 1995, gives Super Burnout a half-page review and awards the game 60% for graphics, 42% for sound, and 58% for fun, which kind of looks like an overall rating as well. The reviewer likes the speed of the game. He says that the computer opponents are basically too good, so good that they defy physics. He calls the game shallow and boring, and makes for a very middling game. Paraphrasing here. Video Games, another German magazine, same month, similar half-page review, but the reviewer guy looks a lot more 90s with the mustache and mullet thing going on. The review is titled Hang On 95, graphics 62%, music 74%, sound effects 41%, but the end result is the same 58% overall. He says that there's no real difference in the road grip between the different bikes, and while the game does make good use of the Jaguar, the roadside scenery is pretty poor, but fans of racing games would probably like it. Moving on to something a little more modern, but still very much German, we have a review from Nexgam, Nexgam, I'll never get that right. We have a review from Nexgam, dated June of 2013. The overall score here is 6.1 out of 10, and the reviewer also likens the game to Super Hang-On on the Jaguar. He says, this is from Arithia's translation, he says, overall, Super Burnout is a good representative of the superscalar racing genre, despite some flaws in AI and lack of life in the tracks. To compensate, there is a very good engine noise, as well as a 2-player mode, which is relatively easy to play. Hang-On fans can take a look at it, but shouldn't expect too much because the solo gets boring fast. Due to a lack of competition, the game can nevertheless be called the best motorcycle game on the Jaguar. I also ran this review through Google Translate. I did this before I got the translation from Arithius. And here's what one part reads. It's so wacky I had to include it verbatim. In talking about the AI, he says that they can be set to several levels, but, and I quote again from the Google translation, however, you have slopped a bit here because either they are stupid like straw or the purest trains. I think what this means is that the computer opponent either does dumb things or they drive like they're on rails, something like that. He says that the sides of the road appear lifeless, and at low speeds the scaling isn't all that smooth and there's some pop-in visible, which is true, especially in the distance. I noticed this when doing my first gear runs of the track. On a long straightaway, you can see trees pop in off in the distance, and their scaling can be choppy until you get a little closer. This is a game built for speed, not for Sunday drives, but as the reviewer mentions, it is noticeable when you're just starting out. For pros, he lists lightning-fast bitmap graphics, the fun 2-player mode, and good background music. For cons, he has boring track design, AI leaves something to be desired, and too little variety in single-player modes. There's a user rating here too, which is 9.3 out of 10 across 7 votes. Just Claw's Jag site, April 2013 or earlier, it's kind of hard to tell, gives the game 4 stars out of 5, but there's no review here to speak of. Digital Press, September 2005, breaks down Super Burnout on a scale of 1 to 10 with graphics 9, sound 8, gameplay 8, and overall 8 out of 10. The reviewer calls it one of the best arcade-style motorcycle racing games ever made. He says that the biggest weakness is the limited number of tracks, which he says number 6, though there are actually 8. He wishes there was some kind of career mode, and says that the nighttime racing was a missed opportunity, which only dilutes the colors and gives you a cheap-looking yellow light that shines in a circle a few inches from the bike. But other than that, he says, by keeping it simple, the developers put their efforts in this one strictly for racing, and this is the nearly flawless result. It's one of the console's best titles, without question. Electric Escape, date unknown, 2007 or earlier. On a scale of 1 to 10, gameplay is given an 8.5, graphics 8, sound 7, and overall 8. While it lacks innovative technology or complicated details, the review says, it makes up for these shortcomings with lightning-fast action and pure, simple fun. Implant Games, June 2009, the reviewer calls the game stunning, the fastest and smoothest third-person 2D racing game he's ever played. It has excellent graphics and handling, but he doesn't like how in championship mode you have to use the same bike throughout, even though some bikes are better suited to certain tracks than others. In the end, everything about this game screams quality, he says. It's a must-own title. On a scale of 1 to 10, he rated graphics an 8, saying, 64-bit? No, but I don't care. Sound is also an 8, gameplay is a 9, saying that it could have used a stronger championship mode. And overall, 9 out of 10. Superb.
Superb.
Yeah, I gotta use that Looney Tunes Space Race clip whenever I say superb.
Superb.
Yeah, see? And finally we come to the video game critic, who gives the game a grade of A, and closes out the review by saying, easy to play and easy on the eyes, Super Burnout is about as much fun as you can have on the Jaguar. One last bit of music from the game here, and then we'll move on to rarity and pricing. On Atari Age, Super Burnout's rarity is rated a 4 out of 10, and looking at my list of Atari vendors, I see the game listed for $49.95, boxed at Best Electronics, Video 61, new in box for $99.95, and on eBay I see recent sales, well, recent as of whenever I gathered these numbers, which was months ago, but the sales were for $33 to $45 loose, with one outlier who paid $71 plus shipping for a loose cart. $55 to $83 boxed, with a couple new in box in that range. UK pricing, £70 new, £45 used, both of which had significant shipping costs added into those prices. I saw one of these pop up on Goodwill auctions several months ago. Goodwill, if you aren't familiar, is an American chain of stores where people donate used items, and Goodwill will spruce them up for sale, providing jobs and skills and sometimes Atari games. To supplement the stores, there's an auction site where some of the items are given a wider audience than what you find in the store, and I keep a lookout for anything Atari related. Some say it's cheaper than eBay, and that might be, but not by a whole lot, at least not anymore. Once you factor in shipping and handling, there is a separate handling charge for most things. Anyway, I saw Super Burnout pop up in box, and that sold for $53 plus another $3 handling. So on the low end of what sold on eBay, but not by a wide margin. One of the reviews I mentioned, the one from Implant Games, had some comments where people were finding Super Burnout for $15 to $35, $10 at Midwest Gaming Classic, but that was from 2009, so prices have definitely gone up since then. My review of Super Burnout, as well as the thoughts of your fellow listeners, that's all coming up right after this. This is what I think happened. I bought this game for my Jaguar, and my brother bought a copy for his Jaguar. I traded in my copy for a used PlayStation 3. Well, not just Super Burnout, but also AVP, Iron Soldier, Ultra Vortec, and a whole actual working Jaguar with 2 controllers and everything in perfect condition, including manuals and overlays. I think the game store made out pretty well on that deal. So now the copy of the game that I own is my brother's with all of his best times. Well, his and his friends. Though one of the scores is actually mine. Now at least. I set the lap record for France on my very last playthrough before recording. All the other times on the cartridge I haven't been able to touch, and some of these did actually beat the times recorded in the end scroller. In Australia, my brother's friend Jeff beat Olivier Nallet's top score of 31.41 seconds for a single lap. The end scroller didn't say if these were lap times or average times, it just says best times, so I'm going to go with lap times here. So in Australia, Jeff beat Monsieur Fubert's time by 15/100ths of a second. In Brazil and Germany, my brother beat the top scorers from Talfan Kabilu and his team at Atari, Brazil by 56/100ths of a second. That's a pretty big margin, and Germany by an even half second. I'm sure he and his friend used the Punisher for these times, but I didn't ask. Playing Super Burnout back in 1995, a couple things really impressed me. The overall speed of the game, and how cool the road looked. Everything else in the game has that cartoony hand-drawn look, which makes sense because it is hand-drawn, but the road has some realism to it. It looks great. The voice was kind of a weird choice, English, but with a subtle accent I couldn't quite place. And that was it. I liked the game, I just didn't come back to it that often. I'd have to say I appreciate this game much more now, which comes as a result of playing it a whole lot for this episode. Let me break it down. What I like about Super Burnout most of all is that it's fast and fun. The controls are simple and predictable, they work just like you'd expect, giving the game a very shallow learning curve. The movement is fast and smooth, you do feel like you're barreling down the road at insane speeds. It has what it needs and little else. I don't want a career mode, I don't want to have to earn money to repair my bike after a race and buy upgrades and stuff. I just want to race. This is something that I think I mentioned in the Power Drive Rally episode, which has that lengthy career mode where you're trying to walk the tightrope of what you can fix with what money you have left. That sort of mechanic, it isn't fun for me, so I'm glad that it's not part of Super Burnout. I love the attention to detail in the background and ambient light level changes in the America and Brazil tracks. The music is something that I barely noticed back in the 90s, but I totally appreciate now, especially when cranked up in the mix. I can't believe how good this sounds. It's like, okay, there are Pro Tracker style mod files, 4 channels with 8 kHz samples, and there are other types of mod files, newer technology, many channels with a much higher sampling rate. XM format comes to mind. So I would download all the mod files I could find around 1994 and 95, but when I found XM files, they sounded so much better, richer, and more layered that I switched my focus to XM instead. Super Burnout's music sounds a whole lot like these XM files. Japan's music track is my favorite, Australia and Brazil and France are great too, and the title theme, and Shen's theme, the end credits. And I'll move on. It's all good, basically. The way the tracks dissolve and reform when you're flipping through the menus, it's such a cool effect, so polished and impressive. I like the crashes. When you crash, the camera stops, but you and your bike fly forward. The faster you're going, the better your distance. It's as much fun as you can have running into a roadside barrier at 180 miles per hour. And speaking of which, seeing the computer crash into you, it never gets old. I once caused a 6 motorcycle pileup, including myself. I'm quite proud of that. My son and I had fun messing with the game using the head of the pack cheat, just seeing what would happen, and the results were pretty wild. Finally, I like that you can play through the entire game in as little as 25 minutes. Championship mode, 2 laps per race. Long gameplay sessions are in my past, not something that I typically do more than, once or twice a year anymore. Super Burnout can pack a good, full experience into those 25 minutes. Give yourself the Punisher and let her rip. It's a good time. Here's what I don't like about Super Burnout. The menu is not laid out well. It's not like, and I'm going to say something nice about Checkered Flag, so mark this down on your calendars, but in Checkered Flag you can choose your vehicle, track, racing mode, drones, laps, all of that and more on a single screen. But in Super Burnout you have to go digging a bit to set up your race. Changing between manual and automatic transmission is especially buried. Alright, the roadside objects, you're not supposed to look closely at these, but you are nevertheless driving past straight rows of identical trees, long stretches of chain link fences. The trees could be staggered, the sprites varied a bit, and it would look more organic and less artificial. I don't know if it'd be hard to do without impacting the silky frame rate, but you can't not notice the unnatural uniformity. There are some tracks like France and Japan that do stagger the trees sometimes, so that makes me think it could have been done everywhere, or most everywhere. Like Val d'Isère skiing and snowboarding, the road here in Super Burnout is essentially flat. Yeah, you've got hills, but you only ever go up and down. The immediate horizon is always, well, horizontal. There are no banked turns, for example. I'm not a game developer, but I think it would have meant a massive change to the game engine, one that would eat into the frame rate. So it might not be a good trade-off, but I'm listing cons, so I've got to mention it. The default sound mix has the voice and engine noise too high and the music too low. Watch footage of the game on YouTube, and you'll be forgiven for thinking that the game has maybe a very simple beat going on in the background and nothing else. But there is something else, and it's crushed by the voice and engine noise. You know, the engine noise that the reviewer from EGM didn't hear. The tires on these bikes have terrible grip. Of the 6 default choices, 1 has very low grip, 2 are low grip, and 2 are just medium. I would have liked a little more grip without being confined to the turtle. The balance here might not be fairly distributed, I guess is what I'm saying. I played the sound, but I think that's it. I think I'm out of cons. So let's check in with the No Swear Gamer scale. How this rating system works is that the 5 best games on the Jaguar get a Hall of Fame rating, and the 5 worst games on the Jaguar get a trash rating. Everything in the middle falls into either solid for games that you like, or meh for games that you kinda don't. Make sense? Okay, so for me, Super Burnout gets a solid rating, high solid. It's a frantic good time, a console exclusive that has aged very well. There are 5 games that I like more on the Jaguar, but this one would probably be in my top 10. Before I get into listener feedback on Super Burnout, I wanted to talk some more about the magazine reviews. I gave them their say pretty much without commentary from me. That part of the show, everything before the theme song intermission, I try to keep all of that objective. Over here on this side of the break, though, this is all opinion, and I've got some opinions. One of the reviews, I think it was one of the German ones, says that the AI is too good, basically, that they're infallible. I can legit beat the computer sometimes. I can take an honest first place, like on the Australia track, especially using Sliding Thunder. And I'm no good at racing games, I've said it before. Some tracks, like America and France, I do have a hard time with those, to be sure. The biggest review that stuck out for me was the one from Video Games The Ultimate Gaming magazine. Here's what I don't get. The guy loved Hang On in the arcades. Pure and simple fun, he said, a great game. So, if you like a game, really like it, and then keep all of those core mechanics that you enjoyed, but add brighter, more colorful visuals, faster frame rate, and high-quality music, would you still like it? By his own admission, Super Burnout has all that he loved and more, but is now excruciating and a torture session and video game dreck, all because of the passage of time. I got to thinking about this, and how it might apply to other forms of media as well. Take TV shows. My wife and I are currently working through a TV show called Psych, which ran on the USA Network about 10 years ago. Well, a few years on either side. It was a long-running show. But at least one season of it aired within the same delta T as between the original Hang On in the arcade and Super Burnout on the Jaguar. Psych is a great show, a lot of fun, and if you came up to me and said, hey, here's this other show that just came out and has very much the same vibe as Psych, well, then that's definitely something I'd want to check out. Or music. I went through my music collection looking for albums that came out 10 years ago, and Static Impulse by James LaBrie was on that list. If you said to me, hey, you should check out such and such, it just came out, it's got a similar sound to Static Impulse, I'd say, heck yeah, totally worth a shot. What I couldn't imagine saying is, no, that TV show you recommended is excruciating, it's too much like Psych, or, no, thank you, I endured that torture session of an album, it was too similar to Static Impulse, what musical dreck. It doesn't make any sense, at least to me, I can't speak for anybody else. Some of the reviews didn't seem to get that the tracks were based on the layout of actual courses. Edge magazine, I believe, called the layouts clinical. Another review lamented the lack of tunnels and bridges, which real-world tracks also don't have. Kind of an odd complaint there. A lot of the reviews seemed to be down on the game because it was sprite-based. It didn't use the new hotness that was 3D polygons. But I would present to you, dear listener, that graphically, Super Burnout has aged far better than the polygon racers of the era. I'd take smooth, fast, and clear over chunky and choppy any day. It's actually kind of funny for Video Games Magazine to call Super Burnout horribly dated, when if you take a look at it today, It's its polygon-based contemporaries that look dated. Now, I think Super Burnout has aged extremely well, and you kind of see that in the reviews, which are in general more positive today than they were back in the 90s. It sounds, though, like Atari took the opinions of media like Video Games Ultimate Gaming Magazine to heart. The industry craved polygons and 3D and next-gen textures, too. If Atari would be eviscerated by the media for publishing sprite-based games in 1995, even excellent ones like Super Burnout, then what choice did they have but to focus much more on 3D polygons? But enough about me, I've said my piece. What do you think about Super Burnout? On Facebook, I posted a picture of my postcard and asked for your opinions. Randal chimed in, giving Super Burnout a Hall of Fame, and going on to say, OMG Shinto just solved a decades-old mystery for me. About that time, I worked for the U.S. Post Office, still do, and one day happened upon a postcard addressed to a guy at a local guitar center. For some reason, I thought maybe he was in charge of ordering the Jaguar games, so I gave GC a call. I asked for the guy and was told he wasn't in that day. I then asked, do you sell Jaguar games? What? Atari Jaguar games, it's a video game system. Slowly, no, we don't. And I always wondered why I never got this postcard, as I was the biggest Jaguar fan I knew. Alright, Randal, happy to help. So, either I registered my Jaguar, which I'd have to say is fairly unlikely because I don't usually register anything, or I got on the mailing list because I wrote in to Atari. A brief story time here. This is something that I've done at least once before, along with my brother, asking for information about things like when a certain thing is coming out, or why there's an expansion port on the side of our Atari 7800. I remember getting a letter back from a D. Goralczyk, which I now know to be Diana Goralczyk, Atari's customer relations manager, giving me what answers she could, which weren't many, but suggesting we read video game magazines for the rest. That wasn't very helpful because finding information on Atari in video game magazines in the late 80s was quite a feat. Anyway, after I got my Jaguar, my friend Sert wrote into Atari looking for information about something or other. I don't really know, but this is how it worked back then. I remember in the 3rd grade, we would practice writing letters to companies asking for a catalog. That seems so foreign a concept today when you can hop on their website after a very quick search where you probably misspelled something but got the right results anyway. So Sert wrote into Atari, and they send him not only a reply and probably some kind of catalog, but also a patch, a fabric patch. We were in school and he drew a picture of the patch in my notebook to show me what it looked like. His Atari logo had one too many lines in the Fuji, but I got the point, and I wanted one of those patches. I wrote a letter of my own. I don't know what I said, but I did get not one but 2 of those patches in the return letter. I think I lost one over the years, but I still have the other. Maybe I'll stick a picture of that in the show notes, but I'm sure you can find these on eBay or whatever. That, I think, is how I got to be on Atari's postcard mailing list. But thank you, Randal, for your post. Sorry to go off the rails a bit on that. Björn says, this is truly a Hall of Fame game for me. I love the fast 60 frames per second scrolling, the beautiful 2D graphics, and the very good handling. When I put this game on display at shows like Gamescom or eJagFest, everybody loves it, no matter if it's in single or multiplayer mode. I'm looking forward to this episode. Thanks, Bjorn. You said it, everybody loves this game, or at least today they do. It's super easy for anybody to pick up and play, and yeah, probably one of the best Jaguar games to put on display at retro game shows. It does make a good impression. Now, put on something like Hover Strike, and don't get me wrong, I do like Hover Strike, but it wouldn't be anywhere near as popular. Lestat, that's a cool name. He says, c'est tout simplement le meilleur jeu de course de motos 2D qui existe. With a hard eyes emoji. Now, I haven't played many other 2D motorcycle racing games. I think just Hang On the Sega Master System, though I thought about buying something like Road Rash or one of its sequels on the Genesis that I could play as a basis of comparison, so I'll take your word over mine that this is the best 2D motorcycle racing game ever, but I could see that being the case, yeah. So thank you, Lestat, and shame on you, Facebook, for repeatedly hiding this post. It would often show me everything but this comment, and I didn't get a notification for it. Is it just because it was in French? Lame. Roberth says, easily a Hall of Fame game for me. Super Burnout showcased that, in the right hands, the Atari Jaguar could truly pull off great racing games. What the team at Shen Technologies made in a year, and especially the conditions they were working under, deserve massive respects. I'm glad that I've managed to play it and finish the game via emulator, because I still remain without a Jaguar console of my own as of this date. It really sucks to know that we never saw their second project for their system, Nexus, aka Stellar X, the game that you see teased on the billboards on certain tracks. That's all I have to say about this game. Looking forward to the Rayman episode in the future. Thanks, Roberth. I do love a good 2D shooter, and from what I've read about Nexus, it sounds like it would have been amazing. As a second game from Shen, it probably would have been built on the lessons learned from Super Burnout's development, and we know how well that game turned out. So, yeah, real shame that was lost. History looks back and sighs sadly. We got a message from none other than Olivier Nallet himself, which is the biggest unexpected brush with celebrity I've had since 1995, when I worked at a Best Buy and sold a joystick to the weatherman from the local TV station. Anyway, Olivier wrote, thank you, looking forward to it. Well, thank you. I hope I did this game justice and didn't screw up too much, especially pronunciations and everything in French. We heard from Rhett, who wrote, as a tech demo, this is a pretty amazing example of how powerful the Jaguar was as a 2D sprite scaling machine. But like with the Saturn, the system got railroaded by the big push for 3D and was never really able to play to the system's strengths of pushing hundreds of sprites on the screen at record speeds. The 60 frames per second smoothness of the visuals is unrivaled on the system, and virtually any other console from the time, and it makes you wonder how great it would have been if Sega had been porting over their superscalar arcade games like Outrun, Thunderblade, Space Harrier, etc. to the Jaguar, rather than neutering them on their own hardware like the Genesis that just couldn't keep up. The fact the game holds up so well in split screen is also a testament to the Jag's horsepower, though it's always been curious that the split screen is not in the center of the screen but instead gives the bottom player more visual landscape to see at any given time, giving them an unnecessary advantage. The variety in landscapes and time of day with subtle real-time transitioning with the luma values of the sprites allow for some nice art direction in the game, though the lack of light sourcing from the headlights or the sun or moon is a big disappointment considering how polished the rest of the visuals are. For me, this is a solid. While the visuals and polish were cutting edge at the time, the game didn't have any innovations beyond arcade and console racers that had been coming out for over 10 years prior, and there's just not a lot of replay value with only 6 other racers in the same 8-track rotation. And how about that rambling end credit scroll? I know it was a small crew, but they really could have used an editor. Great work as always, Shinto. Thank you for giving this console and its forgotten library such an eloquent voice. Thank you very much, Rhett. The end scroll is so much like, if you've seen demo scene stuff, it's a lot like that, which makes sense given the story behind the developers, but yeah, it's a little much, all that white space. Many times the screen is entirely white while you're waiting for more text to scroll up, and 5 minutes is a long time for, hey, Bishop, how many words are in the Super Burnout end scroller?
Assuming you transcribed it correctly, 376.
376. Yeah, kind of wordy. I remember, I haven't seen this personally, but I remember hearing that Lemmings on the Atari Lynx has a long end scroller too. I don't know, I kind of like it. Made me smile. The lack of innovation is something that a lot of magazine reviews mentioned. That's certainly not something that bothers me now, but at the time, yeah, console games and arcade games were rapidly evolving, and Super Burnout, well, is a bit of a throwback. Which is kind of exactly what it set out to be, but it's clear that it was a sore spot for some of the reviewers. The replay value is an interesting one. It mostly comes down to trying to beat your best times, as opposed to, like, trying to get further in the game or unlock new things. Because, as I said, you could play through the whole game in as little as 25 minutes. You could beat, and I'm using air quotes here that you can't see, you can beat the game without any real efforts, though trying to beat the best lap times, or championship rating, which is unfortunately not saved to the cartridge, those take effort. I don't know. I replay it because it's fun and doesn't take a big chunk out of my day. Well, now I do. I didn't appreciate the game back then as much as I do now. You're totally right, I'd say, about Atari being railroaded into the big push for 3D, along with the Saturn, another one of those awkward between-era consoles that came after the 16-bitters but before the likes of the PlayStation and Nintendo 64. 3D, I think, didn't really become good until the Dreamcast. A lot of Dreamcast games still look great today, in my opinion. Others before that, less so. The light sourcing you mentioned, you're right, it would have led to some impressive effects, but I don't know, I didn't miss it the first few times I played the game. It didn't stand out, but when you look closely, the shadows are all wrong for the moon low over the horizon, and the headlights don't do anything to light up your surroundings. Thanks as always, Rhett, for your feedback. Finally, on the Facebook front, we have a message from Derek, who wrote, I'm only able to get a decent finish when I use the Punisher bike, which is kind of cheating since the bike is only unlockable through a code. At any rate, the game is one of the best racers on the Jag. I don't care what anyone from EGM says, they clearly wouldn't know a good racing game if the dirt bike drove right up their, driveway? I'm sure that's what you meant, driveway, right? Back to Derek. Well, anyway, my only critique is the lack of squealing tires or some kind of braking sound effect, which I didn't even notice was absent until very recently. Otherwise, the music and sound effects are great. Always satisfying to hear "It's a Record" coming from my speakers. Frame rate is super smooth, which makes this Jaguar title gaming bliss. Hall of Fame by far. A lot of Hall of Fame ratings for this one. Thank you, Derek. It seems like with EGM and the other magazines, they were looking for things to complain about, doesn't it? I mean, with Ultimate Future games, I have to wonder if they came up with the title. What was it, another Jaguar game to crash and burn? Get it? Burn? I have to wonder if they came up with the title before even playing the game and wrote the review to fit. Anyway, you mentioned the lack of squealing tires and other sound effects, and that is something that I noticed too, but only when I went back to capture all the sound effects in the game so that I could, include them in the episode. But after noticing the absence of these sounds, now I pretty much don't care. I crank up the tunes, turn down everything else, and that's how I like to play. It works for me. Gaming bliss, you wrote. Sounds about right. That is going to be it for Facebook. I posted the same postcard image to Twitter and Gab. I don't think anybody actually uses Gab, though I believe Justin from Atari.io is there, and I still post to it mostly because I was able to get in early and grab the username Shinto. I got no responses on Gab, but on Twitter, Peter says, Super Burnout is the best racing experience on the Jaguar, and I'm a huge fan of Power Drive Rally, so that is saying something coming from me. That is saying something. Super Burnout must be quite the game. Thank you, Peter. On the forums, the aforementioned Atari.io, atarilbc wrote, Hi Shinto, I reviewed Super Burnout in a member post here on Atari.io some time ago. Here are my thoughts from that post. Super Burnout is a solid, if somewhat shallow, racer. The game looks good, sounds good, controls well, but is otherwise very straightforward. Arcade-style time challenges, checkpoints, and bike customization or upgrades may have done more to flesh out the game. As a technical achievement, and an example of how the Jaguar handles 2D, Super Burnout is a showpiece. It is arguably the best racer on the system, and is enjoyable in both single-player or versus mode. I hesitate to call it a must-have, but if you like sports bikes and racing games, it's well worth your time. Thanks for reading. Well, thanks for writing. His review can be found, right there on Atari.io, but also linked in the show notes for this episode. I understand many would have liked more functionality in the game, customizations or upgrades. You mentioned checkpoints, which I don't know, maybe like a tour mode where you have a long, very long track with checkpoints and more scenery. An outrun sort of thing, maybe. That would have been cool. I didn't miss it until you mentioned it. Thanks a lot, AtariLBC. I kid, but thanks again for your feedback. On Atari Age, Dr. Clue posted about Super Burnout saying, This is the most played game of my friends' kids on their Jaguar. And they got very good at it, as I believe they got to the point where I never beat them again. Good controls, or at least fun to play and replay. Thanks, Doc. I know I'll never beat my brother's scores on this cartridge. But at least he's older than I am, so I can take comfort in that. To be honest, my son did beat me, I think, once in versus mode, both of us on the Punisher. When he's on the Punisher and I'm on any other bike, there's no way. I can't compete with that thing. RJ also posted to Atari Age asking what other games made it onto postcards, and I posted my list, what I have, and I think it's a complete set, except maybe there's one that I missed. Hey, Bishop. Did we get any text or audio submissions for Super Burnout?
We did. 3 text submissions. That is also general feedback.
Okay, great. Please send those over to my screen, the center one.
Ready.
Our first email is from Lewis. He writes, Hi Shinto. Hi Lewis. I'm glad I checked when the feedback was due for this episode because I've been waiting the entire show for this game. Hopefully it's not too late. This is the reason I got a Jag. Not Alien vs. Predator, not Tempest 2000, though I do love some T2K. But no, I got it to play Super Burnout. Why? Because I love outrun-style pseudo-3D racing games, possibly unreasonably so. And there aren't many games of this style from the mid-90s. Once systems could do full polygonal 3D without too much trouble, most developers went in that direction and never looked back. So this was the last generation of that kind of game, along with Outrunners and Final Lap R. And this was possibly the last one to come home, at least before the recent surge in pseudo-3D indie games like Slipstream, not to be confused with Capcom's Slipstream, which was another mid-90s pseudo-3D game. And Super Burnout is remarkable. Unlike previous generation pseudo-3D racers, Super Burnout dazzles with a fully textured road, large, lush sprites, and runs at a blistering, unwavering 60 frames per second. It is arcade quality. Then there are the little details that show that this game was a labor of love. For example, the headlights and lights in the buildings turn on when the time of day changes during a race. I also love that there's a marking on the road where the ideal racing line is. It must have been one of the first games to do this, and it makes the insane speed manageable without needing to memorize every turn. And that soundtrack. This is one of the best soundtracks on the Jag. Great stuff. And gameplay-wise, it gets a lot right, with my only nitpick being the difficulty of the America track, if memory serves. But the bikes, AI drones, and tracks are generally quite well tuned. I just wish the game had more modes. They could have grouped tracks by style, for example, to break them into multiple cups rather than a single championship mode. I'm not sure if other people will like this game as much as I do, but I look forward to hearing what everyone has to say about it, and I also look forward to hearing your coverage of Syndicate, which is a game I always meant to check out, but never did. Great, thank you, Lewis. Your memory serves well. The America track is, I think, the most difficult. It's got this switchback thing along the top left part of the track that doesn't look like much on the map, but it always trips me up. And I didn't think of it before reading your email, but yeah, the ideal racing line. You wrote that this must have been one of the first games to have this, and that does sound by definition like an innovative feature, the kind of thing the magazine reviews said that the game lacked. I'm glad you like the soundtrack. It's one of the more underappreciated soundtracks in the Jaguar, I think, but yeah, it's a good one. I'm not really looking forward to Syndicate, to be honest, but I've never played it either. Real-time strategy games, not really my thing, but maybe this will change my mind. I won't know until I try. Thanks again, Lewis, for your email. Yes, it's time to check in with TrekMD, who sent us some feedback on Super Burnout, which reads, "Hello Shinto, I hope all is well. I had fun listening to the interaction between you and Bishop that was caused by my prior email. Boy, Bishop is very detail-oriented, isn't she? She's been counting how often you say please to her. I guess she feels it hasn't been enough times. In any case, here's my feedback for Super Burnout. Super Burnout to me is among the best titles for the Jaguar. It's a fun racing game that really does things right. The graphics are nicely done and have a smooth frame rate. There's plenty of color with various backgrounds, and I really like how the environments have day and night scenes. The sound effects are good, and I like the music that plays in the background through the game. The voice samples are also crisp and clear, even if they are brief. I guess you can say they give you the bit of information you need at the right time. I have to wonder whose voice it is that they programmed into the game. The motorcycle controls well also, which is important given how fast things are in the game. Something I have not been able to experience is the simultaneous two-player game. I know this mode of play offers a horizontal split screen, which has to be cool to enjoy with a friend. The one-player championship mode is cool though. Overall, this is a winner on the system. Going to the Final Frontier Gaming, Eugenio. First of all, TrekMD, I don't refer to Bishop as a she. I mean, I guess you can if you want, but Bishop is both a machine and an AI, but entirely without gender. I gave it a female voice synthesis, and that's true, but only because, well, all proper computers should have a female voice, right? I think Majel Barrett's run as a computer voice in Star Trek is kind of the gold standard there. But for Bishop, I'll either use the pronoun it, or skip pronouns altogether and just call Bishop Bishop. Hi.
Hello, meatbag.
Comparisons to Majel Barrett's computer voice don't necessarily extend to vocabulary or behavior. Anyway, onto your email. You said it all. It's a fun racing game that really does things right, and I couldn't agree more. The two-player split-screen thing is fun. It still plays really well and makes the game even more of a showcase title when it does the fast-scaling sprites without skipping a beat. Well, technically it does skip a beat. It skips all the beats because it doesn't have music. But in a head-to-head matchup, I don't think you'll miss it. There should be a house rule or something where the winner takes the top screen to give them a little bit of a handicap. Thank you as always, TrekMD, for your feedback. We heard from Steve Clinton from London. That's London, UK, not London, Ontario, or London, Kentucky, or London, Ohio. Yes, I did look up a list of Londons. And it looks like this feedback includes his Jaguar origin story, too, which is cool. I do love origin stories, so let's read this now. He says, as a child of the 80s and 90s, I think I had a typical gaming journey growing up in the UK, for consoles anyway. My first system was an Atari 2600, favorite game Solaris, that's a good one. And then I moved on to the Sega Master System, which was very popular in the UK, favorite game Psycho Fox. Later I had the Sega Mega Drive, favorite game Herzog Zwei, And then the Super Nintendo, favorite game F-Zero. Although I never had any of the popular microcomputers, friends had Spectrums, C64s, Amstrads, Dragons, and later Amigas, STs, and IBM-compatible PCs, so I got to play my fair share of them. I first heard of the Atari Jaguar through UK publication Edge magazine. Sister magazine in the US was Next Generation, which shared the same content, I believe. I was gripped by the hype surrounding Next Gen and what was on the horizon after the 16-bit era. I would read Edge magazine every month, cover to cover. I thought Edge magazine's coverage of the up-and-coming Atari Jaguar was very good and unbiased. However, as they started reviewing the games, the scores were disappointing, and so I dismissed the Jaguar at that time. I eventually settled on the Nintendo 64, importing one early from Japan, over the Sega Saturn and Sony PlayStation. By my late teens, I found myself building up larger collections for the systems I owned, and picking up some of the mainstream systems I had missed out on. I also picked up some less popular systems I remember reading about in Edge magazine, such as the Mega CD. Retro gaming was not a phrase I had heard of in the late 90s, and the old games were dirt cheap. There was no eBay, at least it was not the same as it is today, to gauge prices. Collecting relied on finding systems in the wild. But systems like the Jaguar were a rare beast, so it remained off my radar until my early 20s, when surprisingly the UK high street gaming store Electronics Boutique started stocking new old-stock Atari Jaguars and Atari Lynxes in partnership with the mail-order company Telegames, as I understood it. I already had fond memories of the Lynx, and briefly owned one when I was younger, so I picked one up with a whole bunch of games including Ninja Gaiden 3, Chips Challenge, and Steel Talons. But I was wary of the Jaguar. It was fairly cheap at £70 for a new console, I think I remember, but that's still a chunk of change for what I thought was a turkey. I remember back to the bad reviews in Edge magazine. Time had passed, and one day my flatmate came home with the Jaguar from Electronics Boutique. They were now selling them off for £1 each to clear the stock. What an incredible bargain. We fired it up with Doom. That was all I needed to see. I headed straight to Electronics Boutique the next morning, and not surprisingly, they had sold out. I did grab what was left, a few games and standard controllers for £1 each, which included Iron Soldier and Wolfenstein. The Pro controllers were already gone too, for $1 each. A few months later, I was leaving my current job, and I was presented with a leaving present. It was a Jaguar with Alien vs. Predator. My boss knew I was after one. What an amazing gift. It was 2001, and that's how I got my Atari Jaguar. Okay, I need to stop reading this for a second. £1 each? Holy mackerel! Buy 'em all! Buy 'em all! Now! Ah! Incredible bargain is a severe understatement here. Wow, £1 each. Egad. Anyway, back to your email. Sorry, I had to get that out of my system. Okay, he writes, here are my thoughts on Super Burnout. I'm going to come out saying straight off Hall of Fame for me. I love fast sprite scalar arcade games, and this game is an indulgent gift if that's your bag. This game would easily blend into an early 90s arcade, perhaps with a dedicated full-scale bike you could lean on like Super Hang-On, but this game would be super Hang-On. And it would probably rip your arms off and fling you across the arcade before you made it past the third corner. However, it's easy to forget with time the context of which this game was released, in 1995. Ridge Racer had been out for a year on the PlayStation in Japan, and Manx TT was in the arcade and heading to the Sega Saturn. A sprite scaler like this was not fashionable on a next-gen console at that point in time. I remember the negative review in Edge magazine, 4 out of 10, ouch. This game was not progressive. The direction of the industry was 3D. It was lunacy to think otherwise. There was no appreciation of such a beautiful sprite scaler at that time. Players were eager to move on to full 3D. It's like this game belonged to a different era, or maybe an alternate timeline where 3D was not possible, so they had no choice but to push sprite scaling even further. But with time, games like Super Burnout would get the last laugh, because we look at them now and think their sprite work is something that would look nice in a coffee table magazine about retro games, whereas Manx TT, released on the Saturn in '97, had not weathered as well, is blocky and a bit ugly by comparison. Although I must state no less enjoyable, I'm just talking about sprite-based aesthetic versus polygons with a low-res texture map. I do enjoy Manx TT on the Saturn with its analog 3D control pad. The music in Super Burnout is also a highlight and suits the game well. The bike sound is fine, and I like the crowd's roar as you fly past them each lap. My only gripe is the menu and setup choices could have been better thought out, but that's a very minor thing. My top tips are: turn fractionally earlier than you think you need to, especially at the higher speeds. It took me a while to realize the rubber tire mark on the track is a perfect driving line, so stick to it if possible. The box art is kind of funny, a nicely airbrushed image of two riders coming over the brow of a hill as the track they are on snakes off into the distance behind them. The logo is quite awesome, the word burnout in airbrushed flames, but the two riders look far too calm, especially as they are riding through literal fire, but I think that's obviously some artistic license to convey the burning theme of the title. When I think of Super Burnout, I think of the cherry blossom trees whizzing by on the Japanese track and the echoey announcer shouting, "Best time!"
Best time!
I think of my favorite track, Australia, with its giant full moon that parallaxes across the background as you glide your racer at night, around its series of large bends that slingshot you across the finish line. I think of that satisfying set of undulations on the German track as the road falls away from you at high speed. I implore everyone to check out this criminally underrated game if you have never considered it. Yeah, you said it, Steve. I totally agree Super Burnout has aged better than the early poly racers, but at the time, it was seen as old hat. What a weird idiom, old hat. I wonder what the etymology is behind that one. I'll have to remember to look that up. Anyway, yeah, so I took a look at Road Rash on the 3DO, which was mentioned in one of the reviews. What was it? The one on Usenet? Road Rash on the 3DO has nothing to worry about. I think that's what it said. I'm too tired and or lazy to go back and check. So I looked up a YouTube video of Road Rash gameplay, and it does look nice for an early polygon motorcycle game, but definitely slow and choppy compared to Super Burnout. A totally different feel. I hadn't heard of Manx TT on the Saturn, though. Maybe that's about the same. Thank you, Steve, for your feedback. I'm glad you found the podcast and shared your Jaguar story, and I look forward to any other feedback you'd like to send this way. Finally, our general feedback is from none other than Kyle. Hey Kyle, here's what he wrote. Since there are no expiration dates on emails, I thought I would send my first one in to help contribute to the show. I can't believe I found this show 5 years after it started, and I'm just now enjoying it. I owned a Jaguar in the mid-90s, but only for a short time, and owned Iron Soldier, Zool 2, and Cybermorph. At the time, I was huge into trading games for others I wanted, while also being an avid gaming magazine reader. Well, since you could see the writing on the wall, well, the page that is, I traded in my Jaguar collection for greener pastures. Flash forward 20-some-odd years, and here I am again with more disposable income than common sense, and I am a Jaguar owner again. My return to the system has been a blast from the past and a really enjoyable experience. Granted, my system likes to scare me with the red screen of death about 5% of the time, but otherwise everything has been a smooth experience. I look forward to future episodes, and I will continue to contribute my thoughts on games as each new episode comes out. What can I say? I am a sucker for content on your podcast and a bit of a tease. Some of my games you covered 5 years ago, and some you won't get to for another 5, I think. I kid. Might not be far off. One thing I will share is that it's sad how hard it is to find Jaguar items in the wild, but in this time of retro collecting that is to be expected. I would love to build a collection from cards only found at pawn shops or retro game stores, but that would take decades. My saving grace has been an eBay seller you have mentioned in the past, my Atari if I am not mistaken. It's a little odd and insane to pay for new in-the-box stuff, but what can I say, I'm a sucker for a nice-looking collection, and their product seems to be legit and reasonably priced. Part of my mind can even justify that I would be paying those same prices if I was a Jaguar owner in 1995, but I digress. Remember the common sense part. Your podcast has been a great discovery. Keep up the fantastic work. Thank you so much, Kyle. I don't... 5 years, yeah, it doesn't feel like it's been that long, but I guess that's right. Wow. Yeah, my pace has definitely slowed. Episodes are getting longer. Work has been getting in the way. Your odd occasional global pandemic, too. I've got all sorts of excuses. I could put together an entire episode all about why it's taking so long to get new episodes done, but that just slowed down getting through the actual games. Getting back to your email, I was never actually into trading games. Other podcasts I've listened to, they traded games for the Atari 2600 onward, but that was something that never even occurred to me or my brother. We never traded a single game. I did loan a game, Pinball Fantasies, to my friend Sert, who was really into it. I probably mentioned that in the Pinball Fantasies episode, but I can't think of a single example where we would have actually traded away a game. I'm glad you're able to get back into the Jaguar. Super hard to find in the wild, yeah. And my Atari on eBay, it's BNC Computer Visions. They're a real stand-up Atari vendor, one of the very best. Shadiness factor of 0. There's only a handful of vendors like that. Thanks again for your email, Kyle. I'm glad you enjoy the show. Ladies and gentlemen, we have reached the finish line, and our motorcycles have zoomed off into the distance. I hope they're going somewhere fun, but I guess we'll find out in the next episode where we discuss the futuristic corporate grudge match Syndicate, which will be followed by Rayman, and then an episode dedicated to the Jaguar CD-ROM attachment and virtual light machine, and then Blue Lightning, our first actual CD-ROM title. If you have any opinions or memories of these upcoming games, I guess upcoming hardware, or any games that I've covered already, or the show in general, or your own personal Jaguar story, please send that in, plain text or audio file, to the email address jaguar@gamebygamepodcast.com. All show information can be found on the web at jaguar.gamebygamepodcast.com or Gopher at gamebygamepodcast.com/1/jaguar, depending on what kind of retro mood you're in. I've got a little story time coming up after the music if you're interested, but regardless, thank you for joining me, and please remember that there is a lot of good to be found out there in this world of ours, even with widely ridiculed video game consoles. So do try to keep an open mind and a joyful heart. Thank you for listening.
And now, story time with Shinto.
I've never ridden a motorcycle, but I have driven pretty fast on public roads. Not even killing turtle fast, as it turns out, but way, way beyond the speed limit. A bunch of my friends and I were going to a Metallica concert. There were 6 of us, maybe 7, I'm pretty sure. Too many for one car, so we took 2 cars. My car and Chewy's car. This would have been 1998, I believe. I had recently bought my car and Chewy had just bought his. We had real jobs, decent jobs, and bought new cars, sports sedans, because we were still kind of a practical sort. His was an Acura Integra with a VTEC engine that had a red line of like 8,000 RPMs, 8,500. It's crazy, and that thing, it revs so high that you think it's going to explode. His car is faster than mine, definitely. My hood scoop was purely cosmetic, but it did alright. We were on the interstate, I was in front, and traffic became light enough to really open up, so we did. In the end, I hit 118 miles per hour, that's like 190 kilometers per hour, before my speed limiter kicked in, and Chewy's car was several car lengths ahead of me by that point, so I guess he won. But I look back at that and think, wow, that was stupid. Intensely stupid. When you're 22 years old, you've still got something to prove, but you should be old enough to know better. This could have gone very, very badly. Once traffic started to get thicker, we dropped down to within a quick brake tap of the speed limit, which is where we remained the rest of the way to the concert. I'm pretty sure I gained nothing in my youth by being reckless. High risk, no reward. None of my friends reminisce about that road trip to see Metallica. The concert itself is what stood out. For example, how a group of people tried to bring a big bottle of alcohol into the event. They were checking bags and things at the entrance, and there was this group that tried to smuggle in, I think it was like half a bottle of Wild Turkey bourbon and got caught. This was a sold-out show with general admission seating, so if they were to go take it back to the car or something, they would lose their place. So their choices were to throw it out or drink it right there. Guess which one they chose. We watched them pass the bottle around between the 4 of them, taking giant swigs. How much of the concert they were actually able to enjoy while remaining conscious or, without their heads hovering over one of the concert venue toilets, I have no idea. Ugh. But I guess at least I wasn't the only one who made bad decisions that day. I try not to include anything newsy, in the podcast because that tends to age poorly, but as I record this, we're months into the novel coronavirus pandemic. It's a big deal, so I figured I should mention it, but in the context of Storytime. It's just a pretty recent story, still ongoing, especially in my country. So, like most people, I think, my wife and I, we buy things when we need them. She makes a trip to the local Costco once a week with a friend, they make an outing of it, and I make trips to the grocery store every 4 days or so as I plan out what we're going to eat for the next several days. I like to cook with a lot of fresh vegetables, so mostly I go out for produce. We tend to run out of paper products, toilet paper and paper towels and tissue, all about the same time, but those items are bulky from Costco, big bundles of each, so we spread it out. we were about out of toilet paper right when the panic hit the United States, so my wife was surprised to see people with shopping carts piled high with toilet paper and bottled water. If you've never seen a Costco, they've got mountains of giant packs of toilet paper and a gigantic aisle with nothing but bottled water, and they were out of both. Completely out. Unprecedented. We, like many people, were dumbfounded why people would be stocking up on toilet paper to prepare for an upper respiratory disease, but that's what happened. And it just so happened to hit the week that we were out and needed more. Soap, too, hand soap. We buy these big jugs of hand soap at Target to refill our dispensers around the house, and when it came time to get some more, that's when people realized, hey, we've got toilet paper covered, so maybe we should stock up on hand soap. But the biggest problem, the most disconcerting thing, was when I went to the grocery store to find them sold out of just about everything. No onions, potatoes, sweet potatoes, peppers, meats, bread, flour, rice, pasta, any of that. Just empty everywhere. That's when I started to get panicky. Here in the United States, you can get fresh fruits and vegetables of all varieties anywhere in the country at any time of the year in abundant quantities. You look at news reports out of, Venezuela with empty shelves and everyone clamoring for basic necessities. That's kind of what it felt like here. I try to consciously appreciate the bounty we have in this country, the food production and logistics and people that make it all happen. But you can't really appreciate something until it's gone, until you're staring at the emptiness, wondering how you're going to feed your family this week. Work-wise, though, it's about the same, actually. I've worked from home full-time, or very nearly full-time, since 2013. I spent enough time in a cubicle farm with noisy co-workers for one career, I think. Thank you very much. The guy a few cubes away who jiggles his leg all day long, vibrating the entire structure. The guy with the obnoxious ringtones, the guy who doesn't seem to possess an indoor voice, and that's all just one guy. Hi, John. But the distractions in general, the noise, the popcorn that was microwaved a little too long, that's not for me. And at my current job, the rest of my team is out of state anyway, so we're all well versed in remote collaboration. I am super productive from home. I've been doing it for years, so for me, lockdown is status quo. My employer provides an essential service, several of them actually, so I have to count myself among one of the lucky ones as far as work goes. I do have to admit to feeling a little envious when I hear of people with a lot more free time on their hands. If anything, I have less. Just before the pandemic hit, I got a promotion, which is good. The plan was to transfer 50% of my current workload to others on the team so that I have more time for my new responsibilities. But my team is shrinking. There is one guy who is transferring anyway, so we lost him. Then I lost 2 more due to a reorg. And then the pandemic hit, which after a few weeks, the company had to do a round of layoffs. And I lost 1 more engineer in that. And then just a couple weeks ago, I lost another one due to an indefinite medical leave. Not COVID, though, thank goodness. But now it's just me and 1 other guy. That's it. With a ridiculous amount of work, and set to grow significantly, too. It's good to be needed, but man, it takes a great deal of effort to maintain a work-life balance, which is always a danger when you work from home. I am very good at what I do. I'm not trying to brag or anything. It's taken me 20 years of glowing, often obsequious performance reviews to get me to this realization, finally pushing away the enduring self-doubt and imposter syndrome that's largely defined my life and career to this point. I'm a rock star at work. I have been for decades at several different jobs, and that's okay. The thing is, I've been a rock star with about 80% effort. I very seldom need to go all in, but still end up netting the largest performance bonuses available, or whatever. 80%, give or take. I read somewhere that for maximum productivity, you should work for 53 minutes and then take a break for 14 minutes. Before COVID, I'd work on podcast stuff or poke around Amazon during those 14-minute breaks. I can't do 80% anymore, not with what's going on at work. In the past several weeks, I have been full tilt, 100% frantic, furious work, and it's exhausting. What helps, though, is listening to music. I've not really been one to listen to music at work, not until just recently, but it really does help take the edge off. I've been listening to a lot of Neil Morse, Dream Theater, Angra, Symphony X, Shadow Gallery, revisiting old favorites, CDs which I hadn't really listened to in years. I don't stream music, I just listen to my own ripped CDs. Call me old-fashioned, if you want. I do a podcast about the Atari Jaguar, for crying out loud. There are some rules, though, I found. I can't do anything on shuffle, it's too distracting, hopping around like that. I play a CD straight through because I kind of know the sequence, which song follows which, so it feels natural and not distracting at all. Before I know it, I've reached the end of the CD and I've written some pretty neat code. The passage of time barely registers, but the result is that I felt motivated and energized. Does that make sense? Picking the next CD to listen to, though, that does take me out of it for a bit. My wife and kids are doing well. The kids have been doing things like self-defense classes online. I took an old laptop with a busted screen. I removed the screen and then hooked it up to our TV, which is mounted on the wall, with a USB webcam positioned below that. You move the furniture out of the way and it works pretty well. I set up a Minecraft server, so my son has been able to play Minecraft with one of his friends. My daughter does Zoom calls with her friends. My wife has taken on a number of projects in and around the house, mostly outside the house, gardening and landscaping and stuff. She does definitely miss those weekly trips out shopping with her friend, though. We tried picking up D&D, Dungeons & Dragons tabletop role-playing. I bought a couple of starter kits off Amazon, but while we've had some fun with it, it's a bit of a chore. My daughter wanted to be the dungeon master. She's just as new to D&D as the rest of us. So playing the game involved more reading through rule books than actual slaying of goblins or pursuing treasure. Can we do this? I don't know, can we? Let's look through the rule book. I don't know, maybe we need more structure to games, something more clearly defined, like a video game. We signed up for Disney Plus and have been enjoying that quite a bit. Instead of a movie being a once-a-week sort of thing, it's been, 2, maybe 3 nights a week. And TV shows, too. We went through The Mandalorian, Agent Carter, Runaways, first season at least. Watched movies, classic and new. It's been good. I think I've rambled on enough. Please take the novel coronavirus seriously. If you need some masks, I've put several designs up on Redbubble, and I'll put a link to that in the show notes. They're not Jaguar related, though a couple of the Jaguar ones I did make available as mask designs. But stay safe, everybody, be considerate of others, and try to err on the side of caution whenever possible. That's going to do it for Storytime. Thanks for sticking around. Hit the first curve at a breakneck speed. Hit the first curve at breakneck speed. Hit the first curve at breakneck speed. Listen to me scroll. I am scrolling. Super. I suddenly can't say super. This is gonna really impact the rest of the episode. Welcome to the Excuses for Not Podcasting podcast. This is a show all about why it takes so long to get the other show out. This is episode 804 in the Super Burnout series, and in this episode, I talk about delaying the release of the completed episode so that I could come up with a funny bit to stick at the end. This is that bit. Apparently didn't work out. Bishop, did that fall flat?
Totally.
Alright, how about this? Let's close out the show with some music. Shen's theme from the End Scroller in its entirety. It's a great song, so yeah, let's kick that off now and enjoy.